It's about time for Type 40 Live, the Doctor Who live stream magazine show. The best way to start your week in geek, all across your view screen on Rumble, X, YouTube, and on Facebook too, to deliver another hit of all things Who. Whether it's from way back then, whenever it was that you boarded your own trip of a lifetime, to the right here and now. It all happens in front of a live chat full of fellow friends, fans, and companions just like you. And look out, some all-new titles may have been announced as the new season looms. We've got all those details, don't worry, but there's lots more to talk about and plenty to celebrate at Type 40 Live. Nice and cozy in the coral with me, Dan Hadley, Birmingham's King of the Geeks. Welcome back to the show there. Hello, everybody. And we'll find out who you are in a moment or two, wherever it is you're tuning in from. Don't forget to hit the little blue link, everybody over there in the Facebook group, and get commenting and tell us about how your week started off so far, and what do you make of the coral there. This is almost like an old friend now, isn't it? And yet 20 years ago, it was all new. This one's been cooking a while. We've been limbering up. I think we limbered up a little on the last show, but this time it's pretty much all out. This is just one of many nods back to the biggest comeback in UK telly history. I'm pretty confident that the comeback of Doctor Who in 2005 can make that claim. Maybe Charlotte Shields feels differently. Charlotte, what do you think?
I think it sort of beat a lot of expectations, didn't it? And obviously, to people who already knew it, there was sort of that nervousness, sort of a bit of, oh, they're not going to do it, especially more with the press, that was. But for people like me, it was the start of my journey. So there's a lot of very treasured memories to do with 2005 with me.
The start of a trip of a lifetime. I genuinely can't think of a bigger comeback in British TV history than this. Maybe when Brucey came back to the Generation game, Anthony, do you think that comes close?
Good evening, everybody. I always think Doctor Who coming back was, I think we mentioned this on Thursday, and I'm going to steal it again. It was a bit like a sleeping tiger, wasn't it? It was ready to come back. It doesn't change the excitement. And I get, Charlotte, you just said then this was where you jumped on, which I also find very exciting, because as a classic Doctor Who fan, I was a sleeping tiger also waiting for this to come back. So when this program finally hit the screen in 2005, I think I probably shared your excitement, although from a different point of view. You hadn't seen it before, and I was old classic Doctor Who waiting to see what was going to happen with this new series. So when you show that picture of that coral TARDIS, Dan, it was the excitement, I think, of the series coming back. And we didn't see the interior of the TARDIS. I think it may have been an episode of Blue Peter when they showed a clip of Rose Tyler running into the TARDIS. And that was the first time I think I saw this, because I think they kept it away from the trailers for a while.
They were very coy.
I don't think it was in any of the trailers.
I don't think it was, Charlotte. No, because and I thought they're keeping that for a big reveal on that Saturday evening.
Yeah, because I think on purpose it was just very basic sets which weren't part of any of the episodes. It was just sort of very low key, Chris in an empty set almost.
Yeah.
Speaking of a big reveal, from a sleeping tiger to a crouching dragon, a Welsh dragon. I'm happy to welcome our very own Luke Walters back to the panel again. Hello, Luke. Oh, sorry to interrupt, mate. You're on the toilet, are you?
No. I'm reading this book about the return of Doctor Who. Well, the kind of when they tried to bring it back, written by Paul Hayes, really nice guy, called The Long Game. You should really check her out. See the madness of the BBC. Nice little plug there. That's. I wasn't a fan of Doctor Who when it came back. I didn't even know what it was. How old was I? I was about 2005. I was 11, so I was in my John Cena wrestling phase at the time. So I was like, I think. But then I caught wind of. I think I caught Dalek, and I was absolutely hooked from Dalek. I was like, oh my god, what is this? And then my old man and my uncle were like, oh, well, Green Death was filmed just around the corner. We'll show you that. And then I saw John Pertwee's Green Death, and that got me into it even more. And ever since then, I was just like, oh my God, this is mad. This is fantastic. So so I come on just after the revival. Well, during the revival.
I'm intrigued then. What made you watch it on the Dalek episode? Because the Dalek was coming back, or
I think it was the Dalek, because I knew what they were. Because obviously they're so ingrained in British psyche, so I knew what the Daleks were, and I remember I think I caught a bit of it, and I was like, "Oh, this is cool." And then obviously the Daleks suckering him to death, and you're like, "Oh wow, okay, cool." And then obviously Eccleston, I thought, see, I didn't like Eccleston at the time. I was so I was kind of happy when he left, and when Tennant came in, I was all for it. But now in retrospect, I'm like, he's fantastic. He's the one I would have wished stayed. But yeah, I think the Dalek just been an absolute tank, destroying people. Caught my childish gaze, and kind of got me hooked, and I'm being a fan.
So you made, in the wrestling world, you made what is known as a heel turn from the world of sports entertainment into proper sort of geek culture and sci-fi instead.
Yeah, massively took a far left turn straight down. I mean, even tenanted up for tonight just in case. So we're ready to go. We're ready to go.
We're very ready to go.
It's interesting, Dan, isn't it? I don't know what you think as, a classic Doctor Who fan, but Luke and Charlotte, when this was coming back in 2005, I think the classic fans really didn't know how this was going to go. We felt it was a sleeping tiger and it was going to do well, but you always had that little bit of doubt in your mind. So actually, Luke and Charlotte, it's really nice to hear that you were hooked by this, because I was hooked in the 70s by this for probably the same reasons, Luke and Charlotte, you're saying. So it's really heartwarming to hear your stories, because we really didn't know how it was going to go.
And also, Anthony, the beauty of it at the time, though, Charlotte, was that even though this was all new to you, it was sort of new to us as well. So, in fact, we were all pushed together, and we didn't feel at the time like we necessarily knew any more than you did, even despite having seen every episode. And, so 10, 20 years between us, it had this great sort of nullifying quality, put us all on the same level. And so there was no sort of hierarchy anymore. That's how I felt anyway, Charlotte.
Yes.
Well, and it's just interesting that, and I find this a lot when you talk about people who are my generation and Luke's, like we all found something different that hooked us. Like it wasn't just one thing. Like for me, like it's interesting, Luke said you didn't like Eccleston. It was Eccleston's performance, I think, now in hindsight, that just, I was so intrigued with this character of the Doctor. I was so sort of mesmerized by just, he was this other, he was weird, he was something different, he was something that I hadn't seen on TV. And like, for me, I think back to in Rose when Eccleston's describing how he feels the Earth spinning. And the idea of just, this, like I said, the Doctor, the mystery of the Doctor, I think, was what hooked me more than the creatures. But with Luke, it was the Dalek. And that's what's lovely, that this show at that point could work on so many levels and could sort of have so many different aspects that different people, same age, could go, right, that's the thing that's going to make me watch next week. That's the thing that's going to make me carry on. Because also, but because like with me, it was a gambit. It was a bit of, I'll give it a go. It was because BBC had already had that slot set up.
In the spirit of giving it a go, I think this is the ideal junction to introduce the final member of our panel for this edition of the show. He's a broadcaster and a writer, and I suspect, given the fact that he's written 2 Doctor Who books here, he must be a pretty major Doctor Who fan. So it's a big welcome to Type 40 Live to Paul Hayes.
Hello everyone. Hello, thank you very much for having me. It's very kind of you to have me on. Thank you very much indeed.
So how does it feel for you then, listening to just some of us briefly recount a little of our journeys with Doctor Who like 20 years ago? Were you nodding as we were discussing some of that there?
Well, I was thinking it's like that whole John Nathan Turner memory cheats thing, because the TARDIS interior actually features really heavily in the big pre-launch trailer. The "Do you want to come with me" one, goes from when he starts.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Plane coming down it, but then he's walking through the set, to about aliens from the past, ghosts from the future. Sorry, I almost slipped into trying to do a very bad Christopher Eccleston accent then, but and it probably actually looks nicer in that trailer than it ever did, because I think that's going to get shot on film. So you get that lovely kind of film shots of it, which obviously you never had in the series. And it's interesting as well what Charlotte was saying about different people appreciating different things in it. And I don't think that's necessarily unique to 21st century Doctor Who. I think that's pretty much always the case with Doctor Who. I think different people get different things out of it. Thinking about when I first started becoming interested in Doctor Who as a very tiny child, from a really early stage, I think one of the things I really found fascinating about it was how much of it there was. It seemed like this big mythic thing, and I only ever saw like tiny little glimpses of it here and there. I can remember the first time I ever saw Regeneration, it was when BBC Two repeated The Caves of Androzani during their run of repeats in 1993, and I was 9 years old. And I had no idea this was going to happen at the end of the story. And I can remember being so, because it seemed like you'd been granted this rare and special privilege to see this event that, you would never normally see. And I can remember
locked away in the archives,
excitedly running through to the kitchen to say to Mum, he changed. I couldn't believe I'd actually got to see one of those moments. So that was something that was always very big, this fact that it had this big kind of mythic history. So that was one of the things that really kind of appealed to me, I think. I don't know if that necessarily appealed consciously, but maybe sort of thinking back on it. But just going with what Charlotte was saying, I think that it's always the case that different people get different things out of it and are drawn in by different things, I think.
Graham Norton nearly ruined it all on the very first night.
Yeah. We were watching on analog, but I can't remember why, but the Digibox on top of the TV was on. It shows how long ago it was, the idea of having Digiboxes on top of the TV. And I panicked thinking there was some sort of bleed through on our setup. So I remember switching the Freeview box off. So I thought it was somehow bleeding through into the channel, the feed we were watching.
I'm hearing voices. Yeah. It's got to be the tech, or you need to see somebody. So yeah, if people might recognise your name, they think I've read that name somewhere. It could be any one of a number of places, couldn't it? Whether it's the books that you've published, or in Doctor Who magazine, or for the BBC website, the Stage magazine. You've written in various places, haven't you, on a variety of subjects: entertainment, sport, and politics too. So you're a very published writer, aren't you?
Well, that's very kind of you to say, only in a very kind of small scale kind of way, but mostly about Doctor Who, which is just the thing I love most in my life. And as always, I've loved it since I was a tiny little child. But I've written various bits and pieces for Doctor Who magazine and some of their special editions over the last sort of 10 years or so. And various bits and pieces for BBC News Online and things like that. And a couple of bits in Radio Times. But yes, my main sort of qualification, if you like, for being invited on your show today is I've written a couple of books about the show. One called The Long Game, about how it went from, as seen there, it's being held up there by Luke.
Modelled by the fair Luke.
Yeah, that tells the story of how we got from the TV movie in May 96 to the show being recommissioned in September 2003. And then I wrote another one after that called Pull to Open, which is about how the show was created back in 1963.
I haven't finished it yet, so no spoilers. I don't want to know how it ends. Okay.
Well, that is actually the beauty and the nice thing about doing both books about both of those things is that obviously you end on a high with both of them. In The Long Game, it ends with Doctor Who being recommissioned, and we all know what a huge success that went on to be, as you were just touching on earlier. And obviously with Pull to Open, it ends at the end of 1963 when we know Doctor Who is about to conquer the world.
As time went on, as the 2 decades in between of sort of, I don't know where they've come from. Where's the last 20 years gone?
I know.
As that time has accumulated, obviously, you're aware that new Doctor Who is sort of catching up with classic Doctor Who. 26 years seemed like a really, really long time, Anthony. And you thought there's no way that any new production could possibly match that in terms of longevity. And yet it's getting there. It sort of has. And although there is, obviously there's things hanging in the air right here and now as regards Doctor Who, for the time being, it is still on. It's still in production. There's new episodes waiting to come out. And so Doctor Who, for all intents and purposes, it's remained a TV constant for almost as long as it did when it was originally sort of birthed. There can't be many examples of TV shows that have restarted, that have had that sort of second wind that has lasted.
Incredible, isn't it? You know, that as you say, the time has flown since 2005, and here we are in 2025, a whole 20 years later, and that doesn't seem like any time at all. But if you think about the old series, so if you go back to classic series, the gap between An Unearthly Child and, say, The Five Doctors is 20 years. And those two programs seem to me like a million miles apart, you know, black and white colour, all of those differences that we could strike. That feels like a poles apart. Whereas this just seems quite recent and within your memory. So I find that always quite surprising, that 20 years of new Doctor Who seems very different to 20 years of old Doctor Who. Lots have changed in terms of technology in the old series, but certainly lots of change for the new series as well.
It's just as with the original series of Doctor Who, it had a fairly involved gestation period. The things that by the time they made their way to the screen and we were sat in front of them watching them and all, I mean, it all seemed very glossy compared to what we'd grown up with, Anthony, and quite high tech and quite involved. There was CG, there was grand music in comparison to what we'd had before, and some pretty big names, the likes of Simon Pegg being there, to name just one. But as we found out in the intervening years, as lips get looser, and as the mystique sort of evaporates just a little bit, the truth will out, or people just are in a position where they can speak from a position of, how can I put this, less risk, shall we say. But I love this image here of the working sort of logo for new Doctor Who. Can you imagine anything more noughties than that, Luke? It looks like some sort of music video, doesn't it, or some graphic from a...
Yeah, it's very early Big Brother-esque, isn't it? So I thought you were going to say Chris Eccleston talking on stage at a Comic-Con. Then I was like, Jesus Christ! But yeah, it's very, very it's very There we go. Yeah, it's very early Big Brother. It's very I like it though. It's quite cool. It's very sci-fi. It is very, very sci-fi. But the logo that we did end up with, especially season 2, 3 onwards, it's fantastic. And it lasted a long while, and it will for any fan that come during that age. That will be their initial Doctor Who logo. That will stick with them.
Luke, I remember a friend of mine seeing this logo and explaining it to me across the phone and saying, you're in for a real treat in terms of the logo, Anthony. It looks like think about a Welsh rugby ball and then stick a hole through the middle. And that's pretty much what you've got coming at you. And that was kind of what I visualized. And it was not pretty far off the mark, to be fair.
I think that was the remit. I think... I think we just won the Grand Slam in 2005. How do we celebrate it? We Doctor Who and make a rugby ball logo. So.
How can we possibly capitalize on that big win? Of course, in the intervening time, 2 decades, we've had several faces in between, good times and bad, I suppose. Results are always going to vary on all of that. And here we are. We've come sort of full circle and back to the diamond logo from all those decades before. So a lot's happened in the last 20 years, hasn't it? And obviously we can't cover all of that on this edition of the show, but we'll do our best to uncover some memories, to celebrate some good times, and perhaps look to the future a little as well. So get commenting, everybody. We want your memories too, your questions for Paul, of course, as probably the authority on this subject of the
I wouldn't go that far. I would never claim to be the authority on anything. I'm just like a lot of other people. I'm just a fan who enjoys sort of finding stuff out and writing about things and sharing it with people.
Marvelous stuff. Doctor Who fans never need much of an excuse to celebrate anything, do we, Paul? I'm sure you've noticed this. The 20th anniversary of new Doctor Who is something that some people are a little scornful of, as if to say, well, what's 20 years? It's a drop in the ocean. We only had the 60th anniversary 18 months ago. Why are we even bothering with this? But the way I see it, if it's something that brings Doctor Who fans together again and gets us all talking, and I don't think there's any harm in it at all. There's no 20th anniversary programming as such from the BBC to mark the occasion, but there is another chance to see over on BBC 4 an episode from the year 2000 of This Is Your Life, focusing on, it's not even a new series, Doctor, it focuses on Tom Baker. So it's not even any of these at all. It's the only thing listed really for the entirety of what is an anniversary week. So this is in the Radio Times and over on their website too. It's all listed. And so This Is Your Life on Tom Baker, broadcast on Wednesday, the actual anniversary date, from 7:30 on BBC 4. And Michael Aspel's unsuspecting guest was Tom Baker, reunited with friends, family and colleagues who helped tell the story of his life from childhood in Liverpool through his national service and drama school and working as an actor on stage, film and television. So in one respect, this is a weird choice, but a welcome one anyway. I saw this when it was originally screened, Anthony. So I like the idea that those who didn't or who haven't seen it, because it is out there if you know where to look on various platforms and things. It's nice that the BBC are digging it out again. Did you see this listed?
I didn't see it listed, but I definitely remember watching it going out. And actually, I've just seen it recently because, again, on social media, I think somebody had captured, the Doctor Who element of this with Elizabeth Sladen and John Leeson. So if you haven't seen it, there we go. If you haven't seen it, I'll definitely watch it because it is half an hour of good entertainment, shall we say. It's always lovely to see Tom Baker. And I remember watching this one and probably the Peter Davison one, to be fair, going out live at the time.
I can't remember when This Is Your Life was last screened, Luke. I don't think it's been on for quite some time. It did. I think it went away and then came back. It wasn't as big a comeback as Doctor Who, and it tended to move channels as well. I think it started on the BBC, then went to ITV and back to the BBC, and they tried to do it again, but it's never really stuck.
Didn't they try and do one more ITV after BBC run finished? I think sometime in the early 2000s, and then ITV, I think, didn't they try and do one with Simon Cowell?
That's right. And Trevor McDonald holding the red book.
Was that like 09-10, something like that?
Maybe around that time. And I always got the impression, because they only made one, that it might have been a vanity project for Simon Cowell. In fact, I think it was actually made by Psycho. I think that his production company.
It was made by Thames, wasn't it? Even when it came back on the BBC in the 80s, 90s, it was made by Thames.
Yeah,
and that's
right.
It was with Fremantle who make X Factor and all that, isn't it? So that would make sense.
Is it a format that you're familiar with, Luke?
Yeah, I do vaguely remember that. My main memory of this is when it popped up in an episode of My Hero for some reason, which was a very old with Hugh Dennis and Arnold O'Hanlon of him as a superhero, and Mrs. Raven tries to convince him, Pierce. I've rewatched this very recently, and that he's going to be on This Is Your Life, and it turns out that he was, and it's all gone wrong. But that's also a good show that the character regenerates in, essentially. So there we go. And he's Irish, so it's a bit of fun. But yeah, no, I am very, very familiar with it. But yeah, I just got a My Hero bit stuck in my head for some reason.
Yeah, this is a fun show, Charlotte. Are you tempted to check it out?
Well, I know what it is because of sort of, and it's one of those pop cultural things, like we said, that if you've not watched it, you sort of know what the book is, you know the premise. I've never watched one though, so I'm probably quite tempted to watch a Tom, because he's always entertaining and he's always a good storyteller about his own life, and it's usually quite fascinating. So I might actually watch this when it gets put up.
It's always good to see an opportunity to get Elizabeth Sladen back on the television as well. To see them together, it's even better. There's lots of tall stories in this, some sort of awkward moments, but lots of laughter, and a rare opportunity, I think, to see Tom now and again taken by surprise. Or I get the impression not very much surprises Tom Baker, or at least he always maintains the pretense that he can't be surprised, and he's always in control. But that night, I think Michael Aspel did manage to get him a few times.
few cracks in that Tom Baker persona that he's always playing.
Yeah, I think it could.
I think also as well, Dan, I think John Nathan Turner and Gary Downey may well be in the, there was kind of like a celebrity audience, people that were there to kind of celebrate the person, but not give any kind of recollections or tales about that person. So I think John Nathan Turner is definitely just sat there in the audience.
Barry and Terence are there as well, I think, aren't they?
I could well be. Yeah.
I can't remember if they tell the Golden Voyage of Sinbad story or not, but I seem to remember them being.
I remember. Yeah.
I think we get a version of various stories that we've heard several times before. But yeah, I don't think it's ever a chore to hear them again, is it? I think it's about time that we check in on the live chat on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, and X, who are sharing this anniversary occasion with us here as we mark 20 years of NuWho. Now, Christopher Eccleston, he is a tough customer. Isn't it? We can't always keep everybody happy, but who knows? We may well make Chris happy and make him proud by the end of it. We do try. We do try.
Welcome to time-rotor.
We're getting there, Chris. We're doing our level best here. Okay, so let's see what people have got to say out there in the comments section. Thank you, everybody, for joining us on this edition of the show, and happy 20th anniversary of New Doctor Who Week. Who's here first? Who's on the clock? Oh, scroll back. There's quite a lot of comments here, everybody. Thank you, everyone. We've got Lord Thoth. Thank you to Lord Thoth. And Stephen Braddock's here too, along with Tom from T-Dwarf Productions. So lots of familiar names as ever. Stephen says, I remember watching Rose like it was yesterday. So annoying. Graham Norton ruining that Auton basement scene. Never live it down, will he? Never live it down. Gary Akers is in the live chat too. So is Shelley Ingle. You're kicking around, aren't you, Shelley? I know I've seen you because Stephen's mentioned her.
I saw her as well. I think she was here, then she had to go, but she's coming back.
Oh, I don't know. The attention spans of some people. Because Puppets is here, just saying from Chicago. So you're in Chicago? Is that what you're saying? Let us know. You have to update us with some more there. Robert Payne's here as well, as is Adrian James too. Robert Payne says, I was pleasantly surprised by the first episode. I think people's tensions were so high at the time. It was almost difficult to take it in. I think I had to watch it twice before I could sort of work out how I felt about it.
Yeah,
because Puppet says, I was a pub and club singer in the Northwest in 2005, 4 gigs a weekend, and I spread the word at every single gig. I must have recruited a few hundred new viewers. But that, Anthony, that was very much how we viewed us, holding up our end of the bargain, wasn't it?
Yeah, most definitely. And at that particular point, I was publicity for the Doctor Who Appreciation Society. So I felt it was sort of my duty, so wherever television program I turned up on, be it the news or wherever, I kind of said, well, let's watch the show. Make sure you tune in. It was kind of that rolling program of kind of making people aware that Doctor Who was coming back. But I do agree with you, Dan. I had to watch it at least twice to get my head around it, only because of the speed of which it was delivered. Because classic Doctor Who, tells a tale, and it might tell it over an hour and a half. This was something that was going to be told in a number of minutes, and it was speedy, and I didn't like it the first time I watched it. I had to watch it at least twice.
It all happened so quickly, and before the end credits had even finished rolling, Luke, I had people ringing me, phoning me up, to get my reaction. Like some of my mates who knew I was this massive Doctor Who fan, and my best friend, he was on the phone, and he said, so what do you think? And I was going, well, anyway, you hated it. Come on, admit it, you hated it. So I was going, well, yeah, I simply couldn't process it because it was, the momentum of it was so different. So I did have to watch it a second time, and then I rang him back. And even now he says, oh, you had to convince yourself to like it. He still teases me about it a little, but no, it was so heady. It was impossible to take in what I was sort of seeing, really. Evening all, says Rob Alexander in the live chat. We've got Liven's Flame joining us as well. I always thought Billy would be fine. She showed she could act a couple of years earlier in the Canterbury Tales. It was far from her first acting role, was it? But a lot of people were very nervous about it. And Gary Akers says,
didn't she? Bless her. She got absolutely
hammered in the press.
Yeah,
Really
Yeah, but
badly.
I think Russell just come out and said recently, didn't he? He's like, "Oh, we knew we had Eccleston and he was great, but Billy was our like ace in the hole because she was such not an unknown commodity, but she was known for singing, not for acting. So, and she was fantastic. So she she took her in a stride, and to have all that pressure so young as well. It's like, oof, that's
and the thing is, when we did we were picking recently on the podcast, I picked Billy because I said in height she was the gateway. She was the sort of the story was told from her perspective, and if you didn't like her, I think that would have you would have struggled then with the rest of that first series. You sort of had to either be intrigued by her or like her, because and the Doctor was sort of, he was there, but he was a bit of a side character, which I've always thought, what a risky but clever move from Russell at the time.
Jackie Tyler for life. That's all I'm saying.
It's interesting you say that.
More.
That's the same thing they do at the very start, isn't it? Where Ian and Barbara are your audience identification characters. They're your way in. They're taking you, sort of leading you through this journey. And Susan and the Doctor, they're very kind of strange and otherworldly, and it's deliberately, I'm sure, doing that the same way. You have the sort of characters from the normal world discovering this kind of strange world at the same time that you are as the audience. So it's interesting, isn't it? Unlike the previous attempt to relaunch it with the TV movie, which did it in a very kind of different way, where you're kind of traveling with the Doctor first and then you get down to Earth. I don't know if Child and Rose, although they're very different stories and very different characters, in terms of that part of the structure, they're doing it in the same way, I think.
Yes.
I remember Eccleston as being Jesus. I think that was my first memory of it, and I was so flippant of it. But it was in school at the time, and I remember all the kids, all my classmates, they were talking about the one episode because obviously it was South Walian school, so they were. Oh, it was in Cardiff or Swansea or whatever it was with the Charles Dickens one. It was Mark Gatiss's one, and that I think all the kids in school absolutely loved that one, and that turned a lot of people onto it, was word of mouth in school, and then I caught up about 3 weeks later with Alex. So I was too busy marking out for John Cena and Undertaker and being very flippant of Jesus. So
it's interesting that you started watching it at the point when it started going up against celebrity wrestling, so you weren't interested in celebrity, but you switched over at that point.
Yeah, that point,
they really did bring out the big guns for that, didn't they? A lot of people looking forward to catching the This Is Your Life on the 26th of March with Tom Baker there, including Don Bago, who says it's such a shame that Tom and Liz never got a chance to do Big Finish audio dramas together. No, they were written and everything, weren't they? In fact, I think Liz may have even been contracted before she fell ill. Such a shame. Got Darren M in the live chat. Lots of people rolling in, including Bill Barkley too. Matthew Butterfield's in as well, who says, sorry I'm late. We'll forgive you just this once, Matthew. Take a seat, my friend. Enjoy yourself.
Very polite, Mr. Hadley.
Very polite. Very polite.
We have a Knight of the Realm in the live chat as well as the Sentai Ranger, Danny too. Who else is here?
Hello,
Woodhouse
Danny.
122 as well, who says, if I remember correctly, that Tom Baker This Is Your Life aired after the first episode of the Randall and Hopkirk reboot, which was the first time I ever saw David Tennant as he was a guest star in that. Yeah, I watched that as well. That was another comeback. It went well, but not as well as the Doctor Who comeback.
Yeah, and it had Gatiss and Roberts writing for it, and it had Murray Gold doing the music. So there's a lot that kind of flows through, I think, isn't there?
Bit of a dry run.
It's interesting you say, Charlotte, about that very first episode of Rose, because you've kind of sparked an interest in me, because I think that the moment we see the Eccleston Doctor, it's very fleeting, isn't it, Charlotte? Yeah. You know, he appears and disappears. He appears at a door, shuts the door, disappears again. It's at a cat flap. It's all very mysterious, isn't it? And until you just mentioned that, the Turn of the Earth speech. And it's that moment where it sort of plants him in that kind of realization for me as the viewer that he is the Doctor, because he does a very big doctory type speech there. And after all those fleeting appearances, I think that's the moment that grounds it. I don't know what you think, Charlotte, but that's the moment that kind of makes him born a bit.
I think initially he was quite abrasive in those fleeting, the fact that he sort of run to Rose, he's sort of a bit sarky with her. But
Yeah.
and I think that's the sort of thing that makes you think, oh God, who is this guy? And then, like you said, that speech is when you sort of see intelligence, wisdom, and like I said, that mysterious factor.
Yeah.
And I think what Rose did is what every appearance, it gave you a little bit of a clue to the character in a different way. So that initially it was to show him as he's almost like this action hero. He's sort of this savior figure. He's sort of there to be, I'm gonna blow up at your work sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then you see, oh no, he's wise. And then later on, by the end, you see the sort of tormentedness, I think, especially that Eccleston's doctor had of the Time War, and how when they mention it, he starts shouting, oh, it wasn't my fault. So that's what I love about the Doctor in that first episode.
Yeah.
It's layers and it's little insights that you would later on get more for.
Agreed. And it's that bit at the end of that speech when he says to Rose, go home. It's almost like he doesn't want to have that connection with a traveling companion again. It feels like, for me.
I think he's scared.
You know, and scared to engage in that again. Yeah.
Yeah, because he's like the fact that whole when she's sort of saying like, God, you're from the north, like that sort of moment as well. He's like, of course I'm from the north. Like there's so many things which I think he's on purpose almost saying to Rose, get away from me. Like, you're not going to like me. Yeah, I'm not here to be like your pal. I need to get a job done. And I think a bit of that, even if he didn't know he was doing it, was that sort of, I've been burned because of the Time War and I'm better by myself. And it's about him learning by the end of Rose, actually he does need a companion again. That's why that moment when he does sort of invite her, there's a softness almost a little bit to him, which you can see. That's what I mean. There's so many... It's like this examination almost, but done very subtly of the character from just the first episode, and then you've got all the other stuff in that first series.
Yes,
we'll be coming back to the 2005 series of Doctor Who and celebrating the whole 20 years a little bit later in the show. Don't you worry about that. So tap into the old big grey hard drive in your head there and unlock some more memories about them and that and everything from that exciting trip of a lifetime as it was beginning and what it meant to you all the way back then.
Watch Time 40, or I will be paying you a little visit.
With posters starting to appear in bus stations and various places across the UK. It's not long until Doctor Who is back on screen itself, of course. There is something else coming later on in the, I think in about the same time, isn't it, Luke? What do you know about it?
Here we go. I just wanted, when did my mother record a video for you, by the way? That was really weird. Jesus. She could have put some makeup on. Yes, Hooligans. We're coming to the end of Hooligans. Hooligans is finishing. We are kaput, and it is the end of Doctor Who entirely, which is the April the 12th, because nothing's happening on that day.
You can't do that. You can't do that.
No.
So this is your independent series, isn't it, of fan films? But I don't like calling it a fan film because it is more than that.
Yeah, it's more of a comedy, drama, sitcom. We do have one episode which is essentially a fan film. The two characters are writing their own fan fiction, and they decide to do a sequel to the Time Warrior. And it has multiple Doctors and TARDISes, Santarans, and a Dalek pops up. A new series Dalek painted Imperial colours, which looks absolutely fantastic. That is now not Imperial colours; it's gold, much to my dismay. But yeah, so this is about two Doctor Who fans that live together. And this follows their life, their journey, their escapades, and pretty much everything. And then we come to a head on April the 12th and May 31st, when one of the characters wakes up and Doctor Who has been wiped out of existence, much like yesterday, but with a little bit more of a sinister twist.
Well, rather than talk about it, should we just show them?
Yeah, sure. Show them.
Say yes.
Billy, what have you done with all the Doctor Who stuff?
Mate, I keep telling you, will you stop going on about that stupid fake TV show?
Yeah, it's about my Doctor Who Season 7 Blu-ray collection. It was due to be delivered today. And what do you mean, what's Doctor Who? I've had these on pre-order since the artwork leaked.
Doctor Who is gone. And I don't just mean off iPlayer, I mean like properly gone.
Look, I don't know what this Doctor What is.
It's Doctor Who. And it's not fake, it's just gone. And now we've got to fix it.
Time is full of mysteries, but sometimes the answers are closer than you think.
Signs. Cryptic.
I know it sounds crazy, but I know I'm not imagining this. Something or someone has done this. And if you won't help me, I guess I'll just have to figure it out by myself.
Remember, the universe always has a way of bringing everyone together when they need it.
Look, mate, I haven't got time for your cryptic riddles, okay? I've got a gut feeling my best friend's in terrible danger and I need to find him.
I am giving you a front row seat to the end of Doctor Who.
Yeah, well, Gallifrey Base and Doctor Who Edit still isn't back up, so...
Is that really a bad thing?
Great stuff. The end of Doctor Who. Luke, what have you gone and done? You and your various cohorts there at Cinescope Pictures. You've been working on this for such a long time. Now the end is in sight. It must feel pretty good, though. Response has been overwhelmingly glowing, isn't it?
Yeah, surprisingly, because obviously Doctor Who fans are very, very protective of the source material, and I think they can see that it's made by the fans for the fans. We're very much in jest. It's like the episode when they were doing the fan film is then, they take in the make out of tropes of Doctor Who. You get the endless walking up and down the corridors, the sonic screwdriver's not a weapon argument, you get the regeneration. So yeah, it's nice to finally have it all in a place where it's like, right, okay, cool, it's done, it's out now. It's not really the end. We're doing a little bit of a pickup. So we're doing a Tales of the TARDIS version of it. Which
he's not going to be happy, He's not going to be happy at all. First you nick his date, and now you're nicking his formats as well.
I know, but we've got a version of it. We just need to film the TARDIS interior scenes of it, and then it's going to be released. It'll be like a 70-80 minute long episode of it all. But yeah, it's good. Doctor Who is gone. A Time Lord who has wiped Doctor Who out of existence. A very masterful looking Time Lord as well. It's quite funny actually, because I got some BTS photos of just about we're doing that scene, and he's stood by the binge looking at a photo of Roger Delgado trying to shave his beard to try and match it, and I'm just like, what is going on here? But yes,
the things that fans do, Paul. Does any of it ever surprise you?
I don't think so, but it's one of the great things about, two of the great things about the show, isn't it? That first of all, it inspires so much creativity in people in so many different ways, and there is something about Doctor Who that seems to do that more than some other shows do. I remember there's that great quote from Russell T Davies from, I think it's the DWM Second Doctor special from 20 odd years ago, where he writes about how when I meet other Doctor Who fans in the industry, they're fellow writers or producers or directors. When I meet Star Trek fans in the industry, they're serving me coffee. So there is something about Doctor Who that inspires people. I think for a lot of people, it inspires you to find out more about how television is made. And because there is so much material about how Doctor Who is made, it's very easy to find out, use it as a kind of case study of how television drama is made. But there are so many things about it that can interest people. It inspires people to go into writing or directing or acting, like it did with David Tennant and Peter Capaldi, or people get interested in costumes or music, or people get very interested in the story, the lore, the fiction of it, and they write these great histories that piece it all together. And there's so many different elements, and I think that's one of the really nice things.
Or Paul, they mouth off like we do on YouTube and Facebook here at Type 40 Live every Monday and Thursday from 8 p.m. There's even the Type 40 podcast too across all major podcatchers there. These are the latest 2 episodes. There was our trip back to 1989 there for a commentary track on that very last episode of the previous version of the show from 1989. Yes, Survival Part 3, myself, Sarah and Simon, that was. Yeah, we watched it through, had a good old natter, and Simon and I did a sort of latent therapy session there, digging up our feelings about when Doctor Who was taken off the first time. And there was our interview and our quiz with Daisy Ashford and Sadie Miller from Hooverville. Late last year, that was, late last summer, sorry, live on stage in front of an audience, a packed audience. I don't know what they were packed with, but there they were as we quizzed the ladies up on stage there. So that was a good old laugh. Who knows where we're going to go next? Okay, so yes, this is Type 40 Live here. Have a drink ready and something to snack on because there's a lot more to cover as we stretch all the way back through the time to continuum later on. But for now, we're staying in the present, in the here and the now.
Go on then.
You're watching Type 40.
The build up to each new series or special. It's fair to say, though, that just as many of us find it frustrating, maddening, or mystifying. After all, it's just a TV show, apparently, Paul. Just a TV show, and these aren't state secrets, are they? But yeah, I think when a new series of Doctor Who is sort of imminent, it's very much a case of the covers being pulled off it very, very slowly, and we get bit by bit by bit by bit. As people who comment on all this stuff, sometimes we can go from there being next to nothing to there being a sort of embarrassment of riches almost, and that's kind of happened this week. We're watching to see what's coming next. There's been a consignment of episode titles, the confirmation of who's writing them, and now we know when we're going to be getting them all too. So rather than me sort of read through a list of them, I thought we'd have a look at exactly what was coming and what it looks like here across these 8 weeks from the 12th of April 2025. God, what's the matter with me?
She looks very serious there.
It does, doesn't it?
She looks incredibly serious there.
I'm an ordained Anglican Marine. I am not one of your adventures. You need to get me home.
This might be the long way round.
Tell a story.
Oh, we're so safe.
We're staying.
Welcome to the Interstellar
It just got lights.
Reality is on danger.
So there it all is. All 8 episodes confirmed there. We have titles, we have writers. Just like last year, they'll be simultaneously launched across the world. We get it from 8 a.m. on the iPlayer this time now. So there's no midnight drop that drove everybody completely nuts, didn't it, last year? So that's 8 a.m. on the iPlayer every Saturday morning before you get the traditional Saturday evening TV premiere. And, of course, it's on Disney Plus in all other territories. There's the Robot Revolution, Episode 1. Lux follows, Episode 2. Then there's The Well and Lucky Day, episodes 3 and 4. The Story and the Engine is episode 5. And the already notorious, The Interstellar Song Contest is episode 6. The 2-part finale for the season is made up with Wish World as episode 7 and The Reality War is episode 8. Obviously, what's in a name? What's in a name, Anthony? How much can you tell about an episode of Doctor Who from the title? And yet we do try to, don't we, every single time? What do you think about these titles?
It's so interesting, Dan, because a year ago, about now, you were reviewing on Type 40 the titles for the Series 1. And I remember you all going through these titles with an absolute tooth comb. And I was being sucked into the world of Type 40. So in preparation for all of this, oh my goodness, I think I'm more interested to know what Luke is wearing now rather than his 10th Doctor outfit, because that intrigues me more than maybe some of these titles. Might be
what
really.
Is he wearing?
What is he wearing?
Wearing a Welsh. So not also is it 20 years of Doctor Who. It is 20 years of Welsh people being able to work, of having work in Wales. Oh. So I'm wearing a Welsh hoodie to celebrate, and also my flat is absolutely freezing. So
that's as good a reason as any.
Back to the question. Sorry, Luke. I was mesmerised by what you had on. I kind of. Oh, what do I say, Dad, about these titles? You know, Doctor Who and the Well, Doctor Who and the Lucky Day. Oh, I'm sorry. I have very little enthusiasm for any of this. I'm so sorry.
They're quite evocative, though, aren't they? I mean, have we not spent the novelty of those traditional Doctor Who titles? You know, the Empire of Death, I think, was the only traditional one last year, wasn't it? These are mysterious. I think it's very difficult to decipher anything from them, Charlotte.
I think some of them are quite sort of says what it does on the tin sort of mentality, like The Well, Lucky Day, Interstellar Song Contest. I think that they're not so mysterious. It's when you've got Wish World and Reality War and The Story in the Engine. Those are the only ones that are really sort of sticking out to me. And it's also because I know there's a rumour going around that what Russell could be doing, and obviously this is a rumour, but now I've seen those titles, it actually sort of matches it a tiny bit, which is Russell could be actually in this series sort of saying that Doctor Who's a show in its own reality. So the fact that we've got Wish World and the Reality War, and that's a rumour that's now floating around that could be a possible thing Russell's doing.
So things are going to get meta, and that the series Doctor Who will become aware of its own fictional reality.
Yeah, so like Russell could be playing with, like I said, fourth wall sort of meta, and that would also make sense for Mrs. Flood for me, because Mrs. Flood seems to be directly addressing the audience at points. So that would also go with Wish World and Reality War. So I don't know. That's just that. Those are the only two, if I'm going to be honest, which is sort of.
You've thought about it a great deal more. A great deal more than I have.
I have.
How about you, Paul? I mean, where do you sit with stuff? Are you easily whipped up into this sort of thing after however many years you've been watching the various shows?
I find it difficult to get too upset about episode titles. I prefer to wait to see the actual episode. But I do remember, speaking of the 20th anniversary of the new series, I do remember when DWM had the exclusive. Russell revealed the first two episode titles of Rose and the End of the World, and I remember people posting about that on the forums and things. I remember reading a post from someone who was really upset that I mean, bless them. I admire this type of people who want to go in like completely blind. I mean, I would say, why are you on a forum if you're trying to do that? But anyway, these people who try and go in completely blind and not know anything, I think it'd be wonderful if you could do that. It's pretty much impossible to be an online fan and do that, I think. But I remember someone posting on a forum at the time, angry it's been revealed. And I remember thinking, so you're upset about the fact that you found out that possibly an episode of Doctor Who may involve the world being in some jeopardy. This comes as a surprise to you that this may happen. But see, I hadn't heard that rumor that Charlotte just said, but it reminded me of, I don't know if any of you remember this, around in the 50th anniversary year, there was this wonderful rumor that I really loved. I'm not sure if I ever believed it was going to happen, but there was this great rumor that ran around at one point that it was kind of tied in with the missing episodes Omni rumor, I think. And the rumor was that the Doctor would discover that chunks of his past were missing and had disappeared.
Yes, I do remember that.
And they would, because I think because people knew the Great Intelligence was involved, and that kind of made sense with this kind of thread, you see. And the idea was that somehow some reveal of some missing episodes being returned would tie in with the Doctor kind of discovering these bits of his past were missing and getting them back. I love that. I thought that's a great rumor. Someone throw out to Big Finish and get them to do that. But obviously we cautious, don't we, about these rumors that go around. And I think some of them sound intriguing, but I just think, I think it's really difficult to read too much into an episode title. So I don't find myself getting too kind of excited by them, but I don't see an episode title and think, well, that's obviously going to be the worst episode ever. I'm going to write to my MP or something.
Gallifrey Forever 97 put together that custom trailer there, so go and find their channel here on YouTube. They make some fantastic stuff, set it to some great music too, and he's done a great job too of getting together as much of the imagery that we've seen through various other trailers and kind of making it all make a sort of sense. So we've seen various clips in trailers and teasers that have littered social media over the last few weeks. And there's photographs too that have been around for some of them for several months. And we've got no way of knowing which episode they correspond to. And you can never judge by an episode title like this. And that, I kind of like that. I like the fact that some of this stuff is harder to read. I like the fact that these are kind of mysterious. But then again, I felt that about the titles last year. And the reality of it, I found, was that a great many of the titles didn't really reflect, I feel, anything about the story themselves when I actually came to watch it. So this year I'm approaching with a considerable amount more caution. I like the fact that there seems to be tonally, the episodes themselves do seem to be darker. There's actually monsters in this as well. There didn't appear to be last year, so there's a certain amount of threat of old school scares, and the idea too that anything could happen and that some of these characters may indeed be in harm's way. I never felt that throughout the entirety of the last series, with the exception maybe of 73 Yards. It was a very strange run. I'm hoping for a lot more this time, Luke, and give me a pair of fangs and somebody. Just look and feel like Doctor Who, and then I think we're more than halfway there,
Yeah, I'm more inclined to agree with Paul, only because I've given him money because I bought his book. So if I didn't, I'd be a hypocrite. But yeah, no, I think last season's one, I think apart from the only one that stood out with me was Space Babies, and I was just like, oh no. I think that was the only one for me. I think all the others, I thought, oh, cool, okay. These seem really cool. Like the Reality War, very much. Russell said he wants to be the Avengers. He wants to be the Marvel. He got the Reality War. He got Infinity War. Maybe there's something there. Wish World sounds cool. Story and Engine. I think the only thing that I have a bit of trepidation about, if the spider is the main villain, they show it getting blown up in the trailer, and I was like, oh no. I was like, surely they haven't done that. But no, they seem very. Yeah, this season seems to have taken a darker turn for some reason. I know they're from the back-to-back. And what everyone was saying is, oh, we wish Doctor Who would be darker, and it's like, oh well, they've done it anyway without.
See, when Charlotte started explaining that theory, then I was prepared to sort of think, I'll just write it all off. But there has to be an explanation for the Mrs. Flood thing. Doctor Who characters talking, breaking the fourth wall several times now. That can't not be going anywhere.
Well, the Doctor has known. The Doctor has known he's in a TV series since Christmas Day 1965. So
yeah. But it's been done with a bit more purpose. That's why.
Black Lives Matter describes this as fluffy and lightweight. I understand the cynicism, but I wouldn't say that what we've just seen looks fluffy or lightweight. I wouldn't. That's not what springs to my mind at all. Who is Mrs. Flood? Will no doubt return, says Bill Block. But it has to. They can't just leave that where it is. According to Anita Dobson, we're going to get some answers about that this season, and it'll reach some sort of conclusion, which I think is ideal, particularly in nature of the fact that nothing else is coming anytime soon. We've gone from the talons of Weng Chiang to Lucky Day. Thrilling, says Anthony Parkinson. Well, it depends on the context of a title like Lucky Day, because it could be, it needn't be as upbeat as we think. This is really caught my eye, because obviously you've got that creature there, whatever those creatures are that we saw on the rooftop. There's one of those on the left. And there's a pinboard here with a picture of Ruby, who, although she's not the full-time companion anymore, she is a recurring character apparently throughout this series. And then various other clippings and things that have been fastened to the cork board. And it's only when you look a little bit closer at those images and you see like global warming and various other things. And it says there that there's a London UFO crash. Something has hit Big Ben. I think, okay, could that be?
Well, that's grabbed from Aliens of London, isn't it?
Yeah. It looks that way. And then when you go a little bit closer to the top left-hand corner, we can see in that picture, that looks a little bit familiar too.
Oh, yes.
And sure enough, it's Henrik's from that episode 20 years ago, all the way back to Rose.
Maybe this is all some grand plan from Russell, because he finally wants to be able to get a shot of that sofa flying out and falling on the street.
So there could be more to this. I think we've said before, you can only judge so much by the titles. And I think half of the fun of it is sort of being pulled along with it. I don't really read too much into them, but if they're evocative, if it's something that I've never heard before. I mean, Dot and Bubble last year, we talked about those episode titles on the show. You're quite right, Anthony. And Simon Horton in particular was very scornful of the title Dot and Bubble. But to me, titles like that, it's like, well, I haven't ever heard that before. I'm not going to forget that episode. And sure enough, that episode was really distinctive, and I would argue one of the better episodes of the whole of the last season, and one where, when you think back to it, it's the imagery and the way it made you feel, Luke, that sort of really stays with you. It had its own flavour, and that's what I feel that Doctor Who really needs to have. Because otherwise you lose the virtue of it being this sort of serialized anthology show, and that unique format that we're always telling non-Doctor Who fans is the best thing about the bloody show.
Yeah, considering it was a Dr. Light episode as well, because Saxed went over. I thought they handled it. I thought he was in there a lot more than he was needed to be fair. Then I was like, he's in it a fair amount, and it made sense. It made sense of why he's not in it. And no, I thought it was very well directed. Obviously, the director did that, and he did 73 yards in the same block. And he's now moved on to do the War Between the Land and Sea, which by all testament is apparently phenomenal. By what I've heard. The rumblings is apparently really, really good. So yeah, I kind of trust them at that point. And you've got Peter McTeague as well, who's writing for this, who's writing for that. Yeah, no, it seems. I think the one thing to say, I'm not a fan of 73 yards. I'm a fan of the first 20 minutes, and then it fall off as soon as they leave the pub and they go on a train. And she's 50, but she looks about 21. It kind of loses itself for me. But
do you think they could be sneaking in a 20th anniversary of NuWho special? Or at least some nod to it here in the episode Lucky Day?
Hope so. I hope it delves into Unit a bit more. Hopefully it doesn't just become like it's a setup for the spin-off. Where I know it is supposed to narratively tie into the finale, but I hope it's just not like this is a setup for the War Between the Land and the Sea. And I hope we do get some flash. It seems like we're going to, if everything that they show there is on the corkboard is in the episode, then we kind of are going to get that 20th anniversary special, even though it is supposed to be the Dr. Light episode, ironically.
I was going to say, is the Lucky Day the Dr. Light episode? That was literally, because off that promo, it looks like it's going to be Ruby and the new boyfriend possible character, which sort of we knew about last year because they announced.
Apparently, it's a very good episode. Apparently, it's a very good episode, apparently, from what I've been told. So it's apparently phenomenal. So.
Obviously, we hope they're all good. Brian the Snape has joined us in the live chat, watching on YouTube, and simply says the word community.
I think we're just naming series and films with titles. So Community it's a great TV show, fantastic TV show.
I like Community as well.
Six seasons in a movie. Let's get the movie soon.
Josh H says the series looks like it's got a lot more monsters, which is good. And Tom says, I hope the spider episode is better than arachnids in the UK. Well, it couldn't be much worse than arachnids in the UK. A lot of people have commented about this spider. There's somebody up here says it reminds them, Miss Bill Barclay says it reminds him of Terry Pratchett, the spider with a building on its back. See, there's imagery and things that I don't recall seeing in Doctor Who before. And the increased budget, I think, is a little bit more, if it's not more evident in this, I don't know. I just think it all seems to be combining a little bit more effectively than during the last run. But then again, all we're getting is these choice cuts, isn't it, Charlotte?
Yeah.
You know, the trailers have all been fantastic so far. There's been a new one dropped today, which I haven't even had a proper look at. The trailers have all been good. I think the episode titles are quite evocative, but it's all part of a publicity machine that we all know the steps to this dance over and over again. The best strategy is probably to take it at face value on the day, and then to sort of roll with it. Okay, what's next? And just get what we get.
Yeah, I think they're always going to show you the best, like as in this is what we think is going to impress you. And it does, I've said before, the actual marketing push so far has been a lot better. The actual material they're choosing to show, the clips, like the way they're presenting it feels like to me, and I think that's all we can sort of talk about is how stuff feels at the moment. Because like I said, we don't know these episodes, but it feels like the universe has got teeth again in Doctor Who, and the universe is actually out to get you again. And I think that's a really good way to sort of present this second series of Ncuti. I think there's a possibility of the fans which are a little bit wavering whether they're going to watch or not. This might actually get some people back, but I still think they've lost a hell of a lot of people. And it'll just be interesting to see what the balance is going to be of people they've kept and people they've managed to sort of go, no, I'm going to give it another go.
I think they've lost a lot of hearts, whether they've lost imaginations, whether they can win back imaginations and eyeballs. Obviously, we do hope that's the case because we're Doctor Who fans. We want Doctor Who to
I
succeed
do think
and to endure.
It's really going to matter. It's going to be a lot of word of mouth for this again. Like we sort of talked about back to 2005, how because so many people was talking about how good it was and how so many people were raving about the series, it sort of was this more and more people watched it week on week. By the end of that first series of Eccleston, it proved itself and it was this hit. I think if there's good word of mouth for the second series, they will probably get, I think, fans back. But it's not going to be an easy job. Let's put it that way.
The concept that you talked about there, that you've sort of teased, a lot of people seem to be liking that in the live chat, or at least it's sort of stimulating their imaginations, which I think is half the job, including Josh H. I like the idea of another world in a dying reality trying to steal our place in this reality, which I think that could be some of the plot of the Fantastic Four film that's coming from Marvel later this year as well. So I don't know. I'm kind of over the idea of multiverses and meta storytelling. I don't like the idea that Doctor Who could be behind the curve in that. And it's a fault that I'm seeing in Russell T Davies. I do think that he is yesterday's man. I do think that if he isn't out of ideas, he's kind of following where he used to be a leader, which I think is a pity. That being said, I thought The Legend of Ruby Sunday was incredibly good last year.
Didn't people accuse him of that first time round as well? I mean, I've not read the works of Philip Pullman, but wasn't there a big thing about the whole Rose and the Doctor being on the two sides of the wall thing? Was people accused that of being a lift off Philip Pullman?
I'd forgotten all about that, Paul, but you're absolutely right. I was a regular on Gallifrey Base or Outpost Gallifrey when all that was going on, and I'd never. You're quite right. Bloody hell, yeah, it's a blast from the past. Yeah.
But then Pullman defended him because Pullman wrote the foreword to The Writer's Tale, didn't he?
Oh, okay. I'd forgotten all about that. Stephen Braddock says, believe me, if this series is good, I'll be very happy. Season 2 is a big hit, shocker, says Lee Smith. So maybe people's minds are being opened to this a little bit, that they could turn it around. Hopefully some of the stories will be genuinely fresh and surprising. I think we do want to be surprised by this. We want to be unnerved. I mean, okay, some of us who are, getting up there into middle age now, perhaps there's only so much that we can see. Certainly speak for myself, Anthony. And having my kids have grown up now, and they grew up watching this. If it can tap into my inner child or my inner grandchild, maybe, then that'd be nice. You know, I like to sometimes the simplicity. There's a lot of joy, I think, in simplicity in Doctor Who, and in hitting familiar beats that, for a fan like me, I'm just speaking personally, but they're doing that thing that it did for me when I was 8. The familiarity is part of the joy for me as well.
Yeah, Dan, I would agree. And you know, don't get me wrong. You know, I want Doctor Who to succeed. I want this series to succeed. I want the viewing figures to be fantastic. Because it's not currently working for me, that's okay. But obviously, you wish it well. But I was just going to ask everybody, these episode titles, when they dropped last year, wasn't there some? Did I miss something? Wasn't there more celebration about how those episode titles were released? Wasn't there sort of some kind of hourly kind of release for those titles? Have I completely?
They did release them on the hour. By the time I got wind of this, they were all out though. So I know they put teaser videos out one by one, but I'm not sure what the passage of time was between them, whether it was 5 minutes this time or whether it was the full hour like it was the last time.
Yeah, because I think this time, Dan, I came in on all of the titles, and
So
actually,
did
I was buying into the kind of hour delays of those episode titles being released, and there was some kind of enthusiasm and excitement from me about that launch. I thought that was great. So correct me if I'm wrong. If that,
I think, and we've all sort of said this, that there's no denying it. There's not a lot of buzz right now. Like it's literally.
That's a big difference. There was a big appetite last year. I think even though the Christmas special hadn't pleased everybody, I think there was still an appetite for the show. The fact that we were getting a good couple of months' worth of new content as well, Charlotte. People were prepared to give it a go and get kind of swept up in this new era, given the fact that Russell T Davies had proven in the past that he was very effective at delivering something with an arc as well. But this time it's a harder sell. People have been burnt by it, and so I think what Anthony's picking up on is probably right.
Oh yeah, and I think the problem was, like, even before though the series went out, and I think that was the main thing that did the damage, and that should always be the main thing, honestly, which we look to and we sort of see. But the problem was, even before that, Russell had already started with some of his comments, and there was a bit of a feeling of him lashing out a bit before we'd even watched a single episode of this new run. So I'm finding the BBC sort of the general at the moment marketing and the way they're doing it, even though I do think it's better, it does feel actually almost a bit timid in comparison to last time. Don't know if that's the right word, but that sort of feeling.
Well, look at what happened with Lord of the Rings or Rings of Power. First season, fans absolutely hated it, and then second season came out, and fans absolutely loved it. Like absolutely loved it. And that was one of Amazon's highest rated shows. People can't wait for it to wait for the commission another 3 seasons on the back of that one.
You're not the only person who's told me that show's improved to the point where I've considered giving it a look, because I am an Amazon customer. Before I wasn't going to go anywhere near it, but several people I respect are telling me how good that show's become. So perhaps I should give it a look.
Yeah, and that was through word of mouth, and people being like, "Oh well, cool. Have you seen this has happened, or this has happened, or Sauron's doing this, or spoilers, or this has happened." So season 2 can change. I guess they were shooting around about the same time, or if not a little bit later. So they did have maybe a chance to course correct and fix some things that people didn't like from season 1. But this new trailer and what everyone is showing is pretty much what everyone complained about last year, is that they want a bit of Doctor Who with a bit of a darker edge and all this stuff. And it seems that's what they're doing anyway. So it's like, oh, okay, cool. They course corrected without actually knowing they need to course correct.
Speaking of Amazon Prime, this Robot Revolution that's kicking it all off on April the 12th looks like it owes a certain amount of debt to Fallout, which obviously was originally a game, wasn't it? But it was turned into a series very successfully by Amazon. We've got these are 2 images that were released exclusively to the Radio Times just last week. I love these big chunky robots, and they're shooty in a kind of boiler suit. Doesn't look very happy. See what they're going to do to him. And there's Verada too, making some adjustments to, I don't know who's ill or what she's dripping, but she's dripping something. So that's coming as well. There's some sort of big cog in the background too, and lots of pipes and things. But it does look very contained in a way that the last series wasn't. And I do like this title, The Robot Revolution. It's not robot, but it's The Robot Revolution. It's not a sequel to Robot, Anthony, sadly. We're not going to get...
I wish.
Yes, so it all starts on April the 12th with the Robot Revolution, and then dropping an episode every week for 8 weeks. Anticipation is sort of mounting. I think here we're cautiously optimistic, I think is the general mood. Are you counting the weeks, Paul?
I just always love new Doctor Who. I mean, for me, it's just this isn't meant as a criticism of anyone. This isn't me saying how you should be a Doctor Who fan. It's just my own lack of understanding. I can never get into the headspace of thinking, I can't imagine what would stop me watching Doctor Who. You know, for me, it's like being a fan of a football team or a rugby team. You know, it's something that grabbed me by the soul when I was a tiny child. And even if it's, you know what football fans are like, even if it's terrible one week and they lose 4 or 5-0 one week, and they say, "It's terrible. This is the worst they've ever been. I'm not doing this again. I'm not doing this again." But of course, they're there next week. They're always there next week because this is part of them, you know. And even if it's an episode I don't particularly enjoy, you know, I'm not going to stop watching. So I always and I just remember, you know, I think it's. I don't know if Doctor Who fans who remember it kind of not being on. Sort of live with this maybe constant paranoia of it going away again, and just always, you know, trying to appreciate the fact that it's there again. I don't know, but I
certainly do fall into that bracket. Yeah.
But it's just, you know, Doctor Who's the thing I love most in all the world. So if there's new episodes of Doctor Who that are going to be on, that's good by me. If there's always bound to be some that I like more than others. But there's nearly always something to enjoy in it somewhere, and like any Doctor Who fan, I've some episodes that I enjoy, and some episodes I really don't enjoy. But I've never, even if we've been in an era where I haven't enjoyed it as much as other eras in the past, I've never been kind of worried or concerned about you know, new series coming, or I just try and take it for what it is and see what it's like and give it a chance.
I remember there was a gap here. I was like, oh my god, like this is absolutely killing me. There's 4 specials, and I was like, oh no, I was like, it's never coming back. So
I remember looking at that, the calendar and working out like how am I going to last? And I was well into adulthood. How am I going to last? It's a year in between these episodes. In fact, I think it was longer in between. I think we had the Christmas specials, didn't we, during the Capaldi era? Yeah. They did that they pulled that a couple of times, didn't they? And I really took it personally. Bill Barkley says that the Robot Revolution looks like the Electric State movie. That's the recent Russo brothers thing, isn't it, with Chris Pratt and Millie Bobby Brown? Oh, yeah, on Netflix. Yeah, I think I've seen the trailer for that. What else? Also, 2 Miles from Robot, says Marty H. Hoyland. So other people have noticed that as well. And lots more comments. So generally speaking, I think some seem to be a little won over by what we're seeing so far, but the caution is definitely in the air. As I said, it all launches with the Robot Revolution. That's on Saturday, the 12th of April at 8 a.m. on the iPlayer. If you want to get up early and watch it over your breakfast, then now's your chance. Later that day on BBC One in the UK. Those outside of the UK can watch Doctor Who Season 2 all the way through there each Saturday on Disney+. It'll be simultaneously available in line with the UK broadcasts from 3 a.m. Pacific time there. And Eastern time, sorry. And then 12 a.m. Pacific time. I knew I'd mess that up. So there, every Saturday, a brand new Doctor Who. No double bills this time. And Type 40 Live will be watching. So make sure you're subscribed and notified. Get well notified 2. Okay, what next? What next? What are we scooping up next? Good luck, everybody. As we always say, one more stop, I think. But before we get there, a quick break. So the time scoop that we use to put together the fan favorite Type 40 Live ad break, sometimes it has a mind of its own, it would seem, Paul. And this time we've a selection of ads from a fixed-ish space and time point in Doctor Who and TV pop culture history. How many of these do you remember from the very week that our show returned to the schedule? We'll see you back here in a couple of minutes.
What if a Dyson was built around a ball? The ball designed to move. And of course, it doesn't lose suction.
Heavens! I forgot to renew the car insurance. Must telephone the broker at once. Telephone, dear? We're not in the dark ages. This is a job for Mr. Mouse. By going online to eshow.com, the mouse cuts out the middleman and could save us a tidy sum. What a clever little mouse. I bought him some cheese. Calm down, dear. It's not a real mouse. Oh, I think he's asleep. eshow.com. Great value car insurance at the click of a mouse.
3 new rides this year. So what are you waiting for? Legoland Windsor. Sit back and enjoy the rides.
William Shatner! It's me. I'm here to take you guys through the All Brand Challenge. Just one bowl a day for 2 weeks will help you feel great on the inside. Eat. We'll talk later.
Remember, 1 bowl, 2 weeks.
Take the All Brand Challenge and see if you can feel great in a fortnight.
Welcome back to your Type 40 Live across Rumble, X, YouTube, and on Facebook too. As ever, we're live streaming in front of a live chat full of fellow friends, cat fans, and companions just like you, and marking the 20th anniversary week of new Doctor Who and him there. Explosive live stream so far. Thank you, everybody, for all the comments and that interaction. I'm here with the panel as ever. So who've I got? Let's have a look. Who've I got? It's Charlotte Shields is here. We've got Anthony Weiner over there on the right. Luke Walters, all cozy and tucked up there with these.
Nice and warm.
With his hoodie. And we've got our special guest as well, Mr. Paul Hayes, the writer and broadcaster and author of The Long Game, the book, I think, Paul, on the comeback of Doctor Who all those years ago, as modelled by the delectable Luke Walters there. So this is published by 10 Acre Books, isn't it?
10 Acre Films, because they started off and what they still do a lot of as a production company. They've made a lot of extra features for some of the DVD and Blu-ray range, but Stuart then expanded the company out to doing books as well. So it's still called 10 Acre Films, but it does books as well now.
What did you think of the ad break there? Was your memory jogged? Do you remember any of those?
I was thinking watching it because I don't think around that time, because it's sort of pre-YouTube, so I wasn't really seeing ads on YouTube, and there wasn't anything much I was really watching on ITV at that point. I was maybe watching some stuff on Channel 4, but so I didn't really remember many of those ads at all.
You're waiting for the celebrity wrestling, weren't you? That's what it was.
It's interesting how there's been a kind of memory shift. I can't remember why I was watching this, but I was watching a video on YouTube a while ago that someone had done about celebrity wrestling. I think just to see what it said about the Clash of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I think there's been for some people, there's been a kind of memory shifting with that, because I think people who do remember it think it was up against Doctor Who from the start, which of course it wasn't. First 4 weeks of Doctor Who.
2 or 3 weeks in, wasn't it?
It was the first 4 episodes were against Saturday Night Takeaway, and it was obviously Doctor Who was well ahead to start with, and then it was kind of even. Doctor Who was mostly ahead, but it was kind of even. And then it was week 5, World War III, that they bought that celebrity wrestling started, and it just absolutely died a death. And they yanked it after 3 or 4 weeks, put it out on Sunday mornings, and stuck some Star Wars films on instead.
I remember people couldn't quite believe it, Anthony. Everybody assumed that Ant and Dec were going to give us a right hiding, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, it was a scary time, for the old school Doctor Who fans. You were willing this to be successful. You really wanted this to work, and ultimately it did. But that threat of Ant and Dec, were they going to steal all the ratings? Was nobody going to watch Doctor Who? I think, as I said before, it was a sleeping tiger, obviously, but you still had that little bit of doubt in your mind, I guess.
I think it was the 3rd episode when we all kind of went, wow, because I think most of us were probably reasonably confident the first episode was going to do well, because it had all that publicity. It was the return of a much-loved show, big name. So
it was curiosity, wasn't there?
I don't think
even if it was people, Paul, who were expecting it to faceplant, some people were watching it expecting to delight in its failure.
Yeah. So episode 1, it does. I can't remember the exact figures now, but it's the final figure is about 10 points something for Rose, isn't it? And then End of the World, it was a sunny day, goes down to about 7.2, 7.3, something like that. And you think, okay, natural kind of dive, and it's about level with. But then it was Unquiet Dead goes back up to like 8.7, 8.9 of them. And I think that's when you think, oh, okay, yeah, there's something happening here.
It's happening. Yeah.
But my point is that I accept that there was lots of publicity and it was going to do well, and you thought it was going to do well, but there was always that niggling doubt in my mind. To everybody else, it might have been very clear, but in my mind, I was just willing that to be really successful, and you just hoped it wasn't going to crash. That was my thought.
It was the longest few weeks of my life, including waiting for my children to be born. As the months, the weeks, and then the days crunched down to comeback day on Saturday, March the 26th, 2005. Doctor Who had disappeared as a regular series 16 years earlier, left a huge hole, certainly in my heart and in the TV schedule, even if it did take the mainstream far longer, really, to miss it. It was just sort of us fans sat there nursing our cosplay and our Daypole figures until sort of flickering hope, really, that it could come back started to gain, I think, because it was the slowest of slow burns. Paul, had you been sat there waiting and watching and agonizing then, as we all had?
Well, it felt like a long time, isn't it? When we found out that wonderful day in September 2003 that it was going to come back, I remember thinking 2005, it feels like a long, long way off. But looking back now from the vantage point we have, I just remember it being so exciting as everything gradually got revealed and we learned who was going to be writing for it, who's going to be starring in it. When we saw those first production photos come out, those soldiers outside the Albion Hospital arch, and on that hot day in the summer of 2004, those photos going around. I remember the first trail coming out. I was thinking about this earlier when we were thinking about trails for the new series. I don't know if you remember this. It was a trail. They put it online in December 2004, little mini teaser, and it went out on TV on New Year's Day to 2005, either before or after the Vicar of Dibley. And it was that It's Almost Time but Not Yet one. It had the zoom down,
the little one we played earlier on,
dematerializing from the end, and it had a bit of dialogue. It had I'm the Doctor. Oh, nice to meet you, Rose. Run for your life. I don't know if you remember this, but I remember looking on at this kind of bewildered, thinking, what is going on with you people? Because there were huge arguments people were having online about who was saying the line. Which line people couldn't understand which one was Chris Eccleston and which one was Billy Piper, and I thought, are you mad? How can you not tell which one is which? But some people evidently couldn't, and that was a very bizarre time.
Just a few seconds of screen time, and it was already causing arguments. So I remember that very, very well. To me, it was obvious precisely who was speaking, but it just goes to show how uptight we all were.
Yeah, maybe. But it's interesting what you say about the trails. You were saying earlier about that Turn of the Earth speech, and it's interesting, isn't it? That was the clip that they chose to put out to all the kind of chat shows and feature shows and stuff. That was the one that was on
the Jonathan Ross show and things
all
like
those
that.
kind of shows. And I knew I couldn't go into this totally blind, and I wouldn't anyway, just because I was the sort of person who enjoyed looking at stuff online. I didn't necessarily want story spoilers, but I just enjoyed hearing like the news that they put out and that kind of thing. But I tried not to see any clips in advance. So I didn't. We haven't talked about the leak, of course, because a lot of people watched it 2 or 3 weeks early because an employee of the CBC in Canada, or someone who's working for a company that was involved with the CBC, leaked it and put it out online 2 or 3 weeks early. It was a slightly early version. I think it's got just the straight Delia Derbyshire version of the theme.
That's right. I was offered it, Paul, but I refused it. I thought I waited all the.
I wanted to watch it properly on BBC One the night, yeah.
And because it was a communal thing as well, so I knew that people. I found in the event, I did find the phone calls and things by my friends a bit of a nuisance after the fact, but because it was a communal thing and I knew the nation was watching, it did have that feel of, like you say, I always use that analogy as well as being supporting a football team. I felt that I had to be there on the terraces with everybody else.
Yeah, there were people. I think Russell wrote in one of his Doctor Who magazine columns, didn't he? He wrote, go and book into a hotel and turn all the TVs onto BBC One or something. But and that communal thing, that's one of the things I really loved about it. And online fandom gets a knock. Fandom gets a knock for all kinds of things. And of course, there's unpleasant characters in any kind of fandom, any kind of interest. There are always
any community
who are unpleasant about it. But I loved those nights online. When Christopher Eccleston, I've just written an art piece about this for something that's coming out soon, hopefully. That night, Christopher Eccleston was formally announced. He'd been rumoured for a couple of days. It had leaked a couple of days beforehand, but that night, that Friday night, was formally announced. And I remember being on the Outpost Gallifrey thread, and it was just so exciting. There was so much joy and so much excitement, and people couldn't believe that an actor of this standing and this caliber was, going to star in our show. And I particularly, he's an actor I'd really loved. At a stupidly young age, at the age of 12, I'd really loved Our Friends in the North. I didn't, I know nothing about Newcastle or that kind of background to it, but I just loved the stories of these 4 characters, and I'd followed him since then, and always really loved everything he was in. But those kind of moments when the big things happened, and just sharing those moments, being on those Outpost Gallifrey threads, and just talking so excitedly about it with everyone, I really enjoyed those times.
Because it was about 6 months in between the announcement of the comeback, wasn't it, Anthony, and the revelation of the actor to play the title role. And Doctor Who fans, and it was all we could think about for that 6 or 7 months, who was going to be the next Doctor. But as soon as we got that name, we needed the other name as quick as we could, didn't we? We wanted to know who was going to be stood next to him. And the announcement of Billie Piper playing the companion, I think we said earlier on, kind of divided fandom, but in a healthy way, in a way that kept us all engaged, I think.
Yeah, it's a reminder for me, actually, Dan, when you show that article with Christopher Eccleston there, the one before Billie Piper, because I was quite new to again working alongside the Doctor Who Appreciation Society and thinking about publicity, and it was always be careful what you say to journalists, and I learned that really early on in this instance, because a journalist said to me, I can't remember, I think it was the Daily Mail, she said to me, or he said, so who's the new Doctor Who going to be? And I sort of replied quite flippantly, it was going to be Bill Nighy, isn't it? And she went, is it? And I went, oh no, Dan, that one. Oh. And
it's not my first barbecue, mate. I knew it was coming.
Yeah, you knew it was coming. And I remember getting a phone call from the BBC. I think it was a lovely lady of BBC Publicity called Annie Fredericks, who reminded me that I shouldn't be so vocal in my ideas about who was going to play the new Doctor. So it was a sobering moment. but I feel as though that might have been all my fault.
Well, he'd been rumoured for
learn.
months, because the day after it had been announced, on the Saturday morning after it had been announced on the Friday night in September 2003, Clayton Hickman went on the Today programme on Radio 4, and he said, well, certainly in terms of, type of person Russell's talked about before, someone like Bill Nye. And a lot of fandom, I think, really fixated on Bill Nye he became a kind of fantasy doctor in a lot of people's minds at that point.
Yeah. And I think, Paul, I was just merely commenting on that fact. It's not my proudest moment or my finest moment. It reminds you, don't speak in haste. I could have cast anybody that afternoon with Tara. What's her name? Tara Condon.
Thank you for that, Dan. This was you.
Yeah.
I knew it was bound to come up because it was the name everybody was talking about, and I think it was just because he was the gangly, eccentric man with strange hair at the time. He was in the seat in the way that John Cleese had been in the seat.
Done State of Play, and State of Play had been a big hit. And he fitted that kind of, whimsical uncle type that we kind of all thought of as being kind of maybe what the Doctor was going to be at that point. He kind of fitted that archetype. I'm sure he would have done it very well, and I'm sure it would have been, good and successful. But he sort of fitted with a more sort of small c conservative view of what fans thought the Doctor could or should be. Maybe, I don't know.
No, you're right. I think that in my head, I think one of the reasons why, and I'd always liked Christopher Eccleston as well, but one of the reasons why I simply couldn't see him as the Doctor is I'd sort of taken it. I think Paul McGann's largely right. I think the Doctor is a hair part, and yet here was the guy with this crew cut on the cover of Doctor Who, and I still wasn't sold.
The Outpost Gallifrey thread from the night he was cast, the casting thread, there is a lot of discussion about his hair. I was reading back through it recently for this piece I was writing about it, and
really?
There's a lot of chat about his hair and whether he should have longer hair, or some people saying no, it's time for a Doctor with a crew cut. There's a surprise, and I don't think that would happen today. I think that's the real difference in the 20 years. And I wrote this in the piece that I don't think the actor's hair would be discussed as much, if at all. I don't think I've heard any discussion of the Doctor's hair probably in the last. I don't remember it being a thing people talked about.
Since this, some myths that were around at the time still persist to this day. And Bill Barclay says, "Well, Brian Blessed was also up for the role." No, Paul, was Brian Blessed up for the role?
No, do you remember what Davis said in one of his DWM? Because another one that a lot of people suggested had been David Warner. And in one of his Doctor Who magazine columns, Davis wrote about how, with all the best will in the world, with the schedule we were doing and the sheer amount we were doing, we would be standing here now at David Warner's funeral if we had cast him as the Doctor.
But again, David Milling also mentions Alan Davies in the live chat. He was also, just like Bill Nye, he was a name that was constantly in the papers simply because he'd got hair that was a bit like Tom Baker's.
Yeah, he'd done Bob and Rose with Davis as well, of course.
Richard Burton would have been great as the Doctor. He would have even blown Tom Baker off the stage.
The names that you guys are talking about, and I've sort of heard these after the fact, it really feels like Eccleston was almost anti-casting to what fans were expecting. So. Like Russell, sort of a little bit on purpose, was like, no, I'm going to get this sort of gruff, down-to-earth northerner. That sort of... You don't think of eccentric when you think of Chris. You don't think of sort of a bit weird. Those traits don't come into mind. And like I was thinking about this as well when we were chatting before. Also, you got to think for an audience which they were trying to get young kids on board. That's quite a harsh casting to get 11 and 10-year-olds to sort of fall in love with this character. Whereas I would argue probably like an Alan Davies probably would have been an easier sell to kids. A softer approach. Whereas, but I think, and this is, I've always taught this to do with kids, actually you need to go a bit out of the comfort zone sometimes to get them on board. You sort of have to sort of almost shock a bit to get your young audience to sort of stand up and take notice. And I just think maybe that was a little bit the logic with Eccleston.
Well, maybe there are fans out there who predicted that Chris Eccleston would play the Ninth Doctor. I've never spoken to one, and
There are a
I'd be very
couple.
suspicious.
There were a few on Outpost Gallifrey. I actually predicted him. Well, said on an OG thread a few months before that he'd be good as the Master. I put that on an Outpost Gallifrey thread, and I've got that on a backup somewhere. But
he's got the Widow's Peak. Well, he had the Widow's Peak.
And the Guardian. There's an infamous kind of Guardian piece from just after the comeback was announced, where as a kind of piss take to try and wind him up, they put that there were rumors Christopher Eccleston is interested. It was a Marina Hyde. She used to do, I think she used to do like a showbiz column for them or something. And she put, the rumors Christopher Eccleston are interested, but it was purely in an attempt to kind of wind him up because they thought he was a bit pretentious enough himself.
When I first saw pictures of them out on location filming this, and it's one thing to cast an actor who I couldn't imagine playing the Doctor, even though I'd liked him in other things. When I saw pictures of him in a leather jacket and a pair of jeans and wearing what looked like Doc Martens and things like that, so this is. I was unnerved and excited at the same time.
Well, there was lots of discussions about there were discussions on those sort of location threads, people debating over, oh no, they're his own clothes. He'll be changing into it, and it got very kind of they're his own clothes, aren't they? He'll be changing into a costume later, won't he? They're his own clothes.
The things that they're still the things that bother us now, but it's so stripped back and sort of shapeless. But the genius of it, with the genius with a small g, was in that it allowed the performance to do all of the work. Imagine being that confident in your leading man, Luke, that you knew you could put so much on his ability to bring that character to life from inside a costume like that, which there's no frills. Literally, it's not an Inverness cape. It's not a frilly shirt. Like, it's not a pertwee thing at all. It's not flamboyant in any way.
Yeah, well, I think it was needed, wasn't it, at the time? You can't have like a Colin Baker type outfit or a Peter Davison outfit. I think you need, it's for the noughties. It needs to be more grounded. Eccleston is a very grounded actor, and he plays it as a war-torn Doctor, essentially, who's no frills, straight to the point, no nonsense. I think you needed it, and it breathes it through the costume. And I don't think until we get to later Matt Smith, David Tennant said his costume was inspired by Jamie Oliver, which is still, it's just a suit at the end of the day. And then Matt Smith is geography teacher. Then you go a little bit astray then of him. He becomes more Doctor-esque as it goes on. But I think, I think the more you see the Doctor, not in normal clothes, but the more accessible it is, you can see how many kids are going around trying to try on their dad's leather jacket, being like, "Oh, I'm Chris. I'm the Doctor."
With hindsight, then, Luke, does this represent Eccleston's choices here in the way that he performed it and the way it looks? Did it kind of represent a going back to factory settings that could free it from those trappings, whereby the people who would ultimately succeed it could maybe think a little differently and think outside of simply being costume and think about the character? Because everything about it was quite, even though at the time it looked so much bigger than Doctor Who had been before, it's actually quite an intimate show when it initially begins. In fact, I think it is for the first 2 or 3 series. And even the trailers that were put out at the time were... it was more the breaking of the fourth wall, wasn't it? This is kind of what people got swept up in. The idea, do you want to come with me? And he's looking us dead in the eyes when he says that. And it's an invitation to us all. And he's constantly maintaining eye contact with us the entire time he's talking. So it's almost like it's transactional.
Yeah, and I think it was needed as well. Going back to what Charlotte was saying earlier about Eccleston being like a hard sell to kids, I think he's actually, in retrospect, I think he's the perfect sell to kids. The way for kids to come in is through Billie Piper, and she's going to be the one to kind of warm this man's heart and take him from who he is, this gruff and rigid. Yeah, the TARDIS looks fantastic. You were so right, Paul. Well done.
I misremembered that completely.
I was like,
because they shot that trailer on film, which obviously the series never was. And it just looks, because it's shot on 35mm, I think it just has that extra sheen to it.
I think it does look great. But I think it needed it. I think you need Billy's your way into it. Like, every Doctor Who series now is told through the companion lens, essentially. But I think he was the perfect casting, and I think the no nonsense, no frills, like even like a war-torn. I think if it would have come in and he would have had a TARDIS like Peter Davison's, it wouldn't have hit the same. You needed something a little down, dirty, bit grubby, a bit very noughties, essentially, very, very noughties. And I loved it. Like, obviously, I got hooked. I went back retrospectively and watched him, and I was hooked, like, completely. To be fair, I did watch The Green Death just after Dalek, and like John Pertwee instantly become my favorite Doctor. But no, like, it's fantastic, and I wish he would come back. And we all know he is back in Big Finish. Him and Billy Piper are back in Big Finish. Which I can't wait for. That's going to be really cool. It's going to be really, really cool. It's nice to see he's doing bits with Billy Piper again. So long may it continue.
On the costume thing, it's clearly something I think that had really stayed with Davis for a while, because another thing I remember him writing in one of the DWM columns was about how, and I think this might have been I think this might have been after the costume had kind of come out. I remember him writing this in DWM saying that after the TV movie had been shown in '96, he was working at Granada Television at the time. And the sort of director of programs there at the time was David Lidderman, a really big figure in the British TV industry in the 90s and 2000s. And he was one of the main execs at Granada at the time. And Davis wrote about, after the TV movie going into Granada the next day or whatever, and asking David Lidderman what he thought of it. And David Lidderman had said to him he didn't like the fancy dress. And this is something that I remember David writing about, really kind of stayed with him. And he clearly kind of I'm not saying Ninth Doctor has that costume just because David Lidderman said that about Paul McGann, but it's clearly something that Davis had thought about a lot over those years in between.
That is also on page 222 of
the in the index. I'm glad the index works.
In the writing of your book, The Long Game, Paul, you spoke to so many of the key personnel who put this all together, didn't you? In front of them and behind the camera there through 2003, 2004, more than I've ever spoken to anybody else, I believe. So people like Lorraine Heggessy and Alan Yentob and Mal Young, I understand. So how easy was it to get individuals like that who haven't said a great deal? How eager were they to talk about it?
Yeah, I was very lucky because look, I'm a complete nobody. I've written a few articles for Doctor Who magazine, but what does that mean to anyone? Nothing. I couldn't believe how lucky I was with people very kindly speaking to me. I got lucky timing wise as well with being able to speak to Julie Gardner and Jane Tranter, because I think if I'd been writing the book slightly later, a year or two later, they'd have been involved in Doctor Who again, and they probably might have thought then they maybe wouldn't be able to speak to me. Maybe, I don't know, but because of that stage, they still weren't, and obviously there's no sign that they would ever be involved in Doctor Who again. They were quite happy to speak to me. I remember when I did the interview, Julie Gardner saying to her, so my book is about how the series came to be recommissioned, so don't worry, I'm not going to ask you about Christopher Eccleston or exploding sofas or anything. And she said, oh no, I'll happily talk about anything. So I thought afterwards, I should have asked you about those things actually, maybe after all. But no, I was really fortunate. They were really kind with their time, and it was just a matter of kind of writing to people and asking, really. Some of them took some sort of tracking down what their contact details and things were. Alan Yentob was interesting because he kept, I think he what some interviews are like. I'm sure you've done interviews on this show in the past where sometimes it's a bit like an oil tanker where the person gives you the answers to the question they either think you asked or they assume you want to know about. And you have to just kind of turn it around to the answer you actually want and then what you actually want to talk about. But no, they were very kind and very, very forthcoming. The great story Lorraine Heggessy told me, which isn't in the book because the book, as I say, only tells the story. It basically goes up to the recommissioning, because I thought there's plenty of places that talk about the production of Series 1, the broadcast of Series 1, but I wanted to tell the story of how we got from the TV movie up to the recommissioning. So it goes from that sort of May 96 to September 03. So I didn't include this story from Lorraine Heggessy, but she told me about there was a teacher at the school one of her children went to, who she found out from one way or another was a really big Doctor Who fan. And so not a while before the series made its debut, she gave him a copy of Rose, because she was really keen to see what he would think of it as a Doctor. Obviously, they were making it, they wanted to get this whole new audience and a general audience, but she was interested to see what a fan would make of it. So she would say, so he was like the luckiest fan in the world because the controller of BBC One had given him a copy of Rose to look at in advance, and apparently he liked it. So that's a story with a happy ending.
Winning over the fans was slower in some cases than others. I think just in the same way, Charlotte, that the connection that we all have with this show, it's no different. The connection that we all have with the show is so personal that it can sometimes take a while until any new incarnation of the series, particularly when it jolts to a new showrunner, before it can sort of find that sweet spot and line up with what we think Doctor Who should look and feel and sound like. But
I think
you not having seen it before, again, it was there was no molds to break, was there, in your case?
No, and honestly, I think that really helped me as a child because I didn't have expectations, and I say that in the best way. I came in completely fresh, like because of my age, I didn't know all the media sort of hoopla of the casting and all the comments, and like I wasn't a fan that was debating it beforehand. So I could go in with a complete, like, clean slate. And I think that helped me because I wasn't overwhelmed. I didn't sort of have a lot of expectation. And I sort of just took it as, if I enjoy this one episode, I'm going to watch next week. Like that, I can remember thinking that way. And honestly, I think I can completely get how established fans, as soon as you heard the Time Lords have gone, they're not going to, Gallifrey's not going to sort of be a big thing. That got you guys nervous because obviously that was such a big part of Classic. And for it not to be so in the forefront.
I loved it, but a lot of fans really hated it.
But I think but as a kid, a bit of me thinks if I would have maybe have heard loads of that stuff initially, I might have been a bit overwhelmed and a bit, oh God, what am I getting myself into? Whereas just hearing a thing, Time Lord, like in one sentence, and then Gallifrey in a couple of episodes later on. But I think because of that, and this is why End of the World as a moment, like even as a kid, I remember I was just sort of mesmerised. It's when I forgot the wood lady's name, Jade.
Jade.
When she says, "Oh, I'm so sorry," that I remember as a kid just being like, "Why is she apologising? Like, what's going on? Like, why has it got that reaction out of it?" Like we were saying, he was so stoic, and then you saw him cry, and that moment was sort of you just went, "There's a whole thing I'm not privy to now, and I want to know more." And I think that's what it did for more my generation.
And you found out, as Rose found out, and got to know the character and the way that he lived, and ultimately something of his past.
Yeah, and I think it was a discovery. It was a voyage of sort of discovering the Doctor, and that's what you did with Rose. So then, like I said, those moments when it's almost like you saw a peek behind the curtain, they were even more special. They were even more sort of, you stood up and you noticed moments.
Speaking of Jabe, do you remember, and this is one of the moments that always really strikes me, obviously, Charlotte, I guess you probably wouldn't remember this because you weren't sort of paying attention to these things at the time, but I don't know if Anthony or Dan remembers how mad it was. It was a few days, I think it was early in the week, wasn't it? They had Yasmin Bannerman as Jabe on the front page of the Times. They had that photo of her on the front page.
I bought it. I've never bought the Times before in my life, Paul.
The other thing about the Time Lords as well is am I the only one who always really struggles to hear Nick Briggs do that Time Lord bit with the Nestine consciousness at the end of the Rose? I always have to really concentrate to hear it. I don't think I knew for years that the Nestine that it says Time Lord at the end now, and I didn't spot that for donkey's years until I read it somewhere.
I didn't know just now. Didn't know that.
I think eventually, having watched it about 50 million times, there's so much in that first episode. It's so quick. And even though I watched it twice that night, Anthony, as I said earlier on, when I go back to it now, I still notice different things about it, sometimes on a creative level, where I think, okay, this is better than I thought, or I've not noticed that gaff there, or that bit doesn't quite work, that's slightly disjointed. There's so much in that episode. It's packed full of so much. And in some ways, I think it still has that kind of, in the way that An Unearthly Child does, in that it almost exists in its own little space, aside from everything else. And for better or worse, the thing, I mean, it's not as, obviously, An Unearthly Child is next to perfect, whereas Rose isn't. But it was the right episode at the right time, and it had the desired effect, which I think is almost as good. Almost as good.
I think you're right in terms of it sitting in its own kind of little universe almost. You know, it's kind of, I think it's great. And it takes a lot from the past. You know, the Autons are back in this episode, which is kind of nice for classic fans watching this. But it does kind of sit on its own for me. It's a speedy kind of, whoa, wham bam kind of 45 minutes, well, probably not even that, 45 minutes of Doctor Who, which took some time to get used to. And I think coming from classic into new, it just took a while for me to kind of settle into that. But once you did, it really was that trip of a lifetime, wasn't it? Because I feel as though Series 1 is so contained, Dan, and is so well crafted. Yeah, it's a firm favourite of mine.
It's interesting what both of you have said about feeling kind of almost disconcerted by the speed of Rose, because I don't remember feeling that at all. I don't remember feeling it was kind of overly, like, I'm trying to think about other dramas I would have been watching. I mean, something like, I know Spooks, I suppose, would have been something on BBC One I'd have been watching. So I don't remember it feeling quicker than I know it's slightly shorter than Spooks, 6:45 against an hour, but I don't remember feeling kind of out of terms and kind of pace with a series like that. I didn't get that same sense of shock from the pace of it.
No, I wasn't, even though there are moments in it where the pace does drop. It still wasn't enough for me to sort of process what I was seeing. And more to the point, I think, Luke, the things that I were feeling as well, because it was very much all about me. Kind of, this mattered so much to me. And another thing that was hard to acclimatise to as well, Anthony, was that feeling of an absolute dearth of anything to do with Doctor Who. And then on the first night, there wasn't just Doctor Who itself coming back, so a series of Doctor Who. There was also Doctor Who Confidential running directly after it. So that was effectively an hour and a half, an hour and 40 minutes worth of Doctor Who.
And the program earlier in the afternoon with David Tennant narrating as well.
And the countdown. Yeah.
So then there was this before as well, Doctor Who: A New Dimension. So all of a sudden, there was effectively 2 hours worth of brand new content that I could obsess and watch over and over again.
The end of Football Focus that day as well, when they were previewing the England-Northern Ireland game and talking about could Northern Ireland beat England. They had ended with a clip of Tom Baker saying, well, it's been done before. And all through the day it was going on. National Lottery, Eamon Holmes came out of the police box that night, didn't he? It was, I
saw that, yeah.
I'll tell you what a smart move Confidential was, though. Like, Confidential is probably, if there's one thing to take away from the revival, is probably Confidential, because that has got, I think that lifted the lid to so many creators on how TV is made, essentially. And I know it's affected a lot. You speak to loads of people in the industry now, they're like, oh, how did you first learn about this? And it's like, through Confidential. It's like, look, I'm a filmmaker.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a massive thing. It's like loads of fan filmmakers and loads of creators, like loads of people working in the industry.
Actually, right. I used to make my kids watch this, watch Confidential. But in all honesty, I didn't need to make them watch it in all seriousness, because it was very, very entertaining. And it had, particularly when it was just half an hour initially. And this model, I mean, I know I imagine that we'd kind of talk in a more sprawling way about this. We have pretty much stayed in 2005. But the truth of the matter is that this model of main show followed by behind-the-scenes show afterwards, that remained in place well into the Matt Smith era, didn't it, Charlotte? It was a constant thing. And we missed it. I think you could say it evolved during the Capaldi era to going on the YouTube channel in sort of bite-sized chunks. There's more accessibility behind the scenes stuff now than there would have ever been before.
I think think that one of the big triumphs of all of NuWho is just how it wasn't just a show, and they did it naturally. You had, like I said, Confidential. You had the website. As a kid, I loved that website and the games and the sort of the extras on the website as well. And like the fact that they'd filmed special scenes that were just for those things on the website that were nothing to do with the show. But you had David Tennant film stuff in the TARDIS. And I think to create such a natural eco sort of system of your main show, your Confidential, and that could change and evolve. And then just to make Doctor Who feel like it was just alive in the best way. And that's what I think you've got to give a credit to a lot of people, that the BBC also was so willing to do so many different things with the brand, that they weren't just like, no, you're just going to get a show. That's it. Which they could have done. Like they easily could have. But no, they were like, we're going to give this a chance. We're going to do this, which no, the shows at the time as well.
Well, I was listening to that podcast with Russell T Davies, gave the interview to David Tennant a couple of weeks ago, and I'd forgotten how initially, I mean, I thought it was initially 8. Apparently, the initial order was for 6, and then it went up to 8, and then in the end, they pushed it to 13. Because the initial reports, come to think of it, in the newspaper were that Doctor Who was coming back for a 6-part series. And I remember thinking, wow, 6, oh, that's brilliant. It's 5 more than we got the last time, and maybe we might get some. But by the time it sort of morphed into that 13, it was, what? It was, of all my Christmases come at once.
And I think the 13 was so perfect, because then you could really explore different stories. Like you could have, like, some of my favourite episodes were ones that you probably wouldn't get if you had 6 episodes, like Boomtown. Those sort of lower key, sort of bottle episodes, like Midnight, like that's, you wouldn't have got that if they would have just been a bit, no, we're going to give you 6 or 8. So that's what I think. I do think the BBC sort of has at times struggled a lot with this show, but it feels like at the beginning of this sort of start of NuWho, they were actually very strong when it comes to, no, we're going to let you do this. We're going to give you this space and this time to sort of build it up. Also the spin-offs with Sarah Jane Adventures and Torchwood. So yeah, I think it's the versatility, which I think is impressive, of what they did when it comes to NuWho. And on that note, me and Anthony, is now bedtime.
Bedtime.
I should make it
not
clear.
Together. Not together.
Yeah.
Different houses.
Yeah.
Thank you both for your company and for reliving some of the magic of 2005 onwards with us on this edition of the show. We'll see you next time. Yeah. Good night, both. Bye-bye.
Night,
bye-bye.
Charlotte.
Good night, guys.
Yes, so the Doctor and Rose, it sort of became almost as if they were completely sort of locked into one another. It became just in the same way that the Doctor and Lena had been, the Doctor and Sarah Jane. It was a combination for the ages, even when the Doctor's face eventually changed, when Christopher Eccleston sort of walked off. I mean, we've gone through that time and time again, but happily they did get the perfect replacement, the ideal man for the time, really. And that was just the beginning of the expansion of the original Russell T Davies era and that ensemble cast. I mean, just seeing them all together like that, this was, for me, this was bigger than the Avengers assembling when it all reached a head there in season 4. But seriously, some of these storylines, the imagery, and that combination of characters, it impacted in a way that carried it far, far outside of fan circles. And people still talk about moments and plot lines and relationships within that group of people now. To me, as a Doctor Who fan, even if they're doing it to complain about what's on screen now, I love that when at Bad Wolf Bay, when Rose disappeared behind. People talk about this all the time. Again, the best part of nearly 20 years on, and who'd have thought that by the Christmas, the Doctor Who would be the most anticipated show in the whole of the Christmas schedules, never mind on BBC One with Pride of Place there on the big day itself, and a full-blown Radio Times cover. It really was a heady experience, Paul. A few months where the series, we went, I think as fans, we went from being, could this possibly, to by the Christmas it was,
I mean, the idea to kind of old school Doctor Who fans, the idea that Doctor Who would have the cover of the Christmas Radio Times. It was never in, it was even at its most popular, it was never in that. Doctor Who goes through, every so often it has one of those real peaks where it really hits a sweet spot with the general public and is massively popular way beyond its fandom. You see it in the very early days, Series 2, so a 64, 65 period. You see it in the kind of early mid Tom Baker years. And then again in that kind of 05 to 09 kind of period. Every so often it just really goes stratospheric. It always exists on a kind of base level in the background of kind of British popular culture, but then every so often it'll have a massive peak. And we had one of those kind of 05 to 09. We haven't had another one of those kind of since in quite that way.
It felt, Paul, like everybody was watching it. Now, whether they liked it, people had a variety of different things to say about it. Some people didn't particularly like it, but they watched it because it was incredibly relevant. It was, I'd say, if it wasn't the most
happen now, do people now that, I mean, we had a lot of choice then. There was satellite and cable and things, but obviously now as streamers have grown up over the past 15, 20 years, and do people just kind of watch things just because they're on now, or are people a lot more selective about what they watch now, do you think?
I think that there's not. I think it's gone from being within communities and sort of broader society to be within closer knit circles of people, whereby if a group of friends, Luke, are all watching, for example, Severance, you'll get together and talk about it. Whereas this sort of broader sense, as a multi-generations of people in pretty much every
you get it a little bit, don't you? Like the old Gavin and Stacey special or Traitors and things, but not as often as you used to.
Yeah, I'd say Gavin and Stacey was very much a kind of a last gasp, I think it felt like, for that. Sorry, Luke.
Yeah, no, I think in terms of streamers, I don't think you get it so much with streaming now. If you look at, like, Stranger Things is like the biggest thing ever. The last season, the last couple of episodes were like event television. But it wasn't the family watching. You didn't get like that buzz on social media of, oh, we're all sitting down to watch it. It's like, I watched it just before going on the train to where'd I go? I went to the Doctor Who live down in London, the Doctor Who like live museum thing. To Time Clash, was it, or something like that? I watched it before then, and it's like, you watch it now. I think people consume media a lot different to what it was. Like, unless, like, which is the streaming, I disagree with the streaming model realistically, because it's not, you want something to be event television, like a Gavin and Stacey or a Wallace and Gromit. And
although today they've just had streaming's first ever UK #1 for the week, haven't they? It's the first time it's ever happened.
Yeah. So I think the way people consume media now is so different, that to get something to be like, oh, this is taking over pop culture, like this has become like a Radio Times from, it's very rare, unless it's like Only Fools and Horses is coming back, or Gavin and Stacey's coming back, or something else. But Doctor Who's been kicking around for so long that now I just think and now it's moved on to streaming as well worldwide, and obviously you get on iPlayer. It's always pretty much going to be on that base level now, unless something astronomically. So it's something changes with it, and you get like an A-lister come in or something.
Never say never.
A really big actor come in, or something else changes. I don't think it's going to get to that level again. Possibly, I don't think it's geared to, in the way people, the consumer, the target consumer that Russell is targeting, the under 35s, they don't consume media that way.
It's probably not in television's gift anymore as a medium.
No.
Yeah.
So
on the other hand, though, maybe that secures the future of this type of series a bit more, in the sense that now a show like Doctor Who doesn't have to get a huge mainstream audience to be judged successful. We've seen with all sorts of, I hate this word, but properties these days, that if you get a big cult audience, that seems to be regarded as enough to keep the show going. Yeah,
justify the existence of something to attract investment. Or to please shareholders, stakeholders, and to make deals with co-production and things like that. We get a lot of comments here in the live chat here on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, and X, Paul, of people reminiscing about the good times, times of abundance, particularly as regards the merchandise. David Mullen is just one of many people who've mentioned how he remembers very well that they, meaning Woolworths and other retailers, couldn't keep the toys on the shelves. Christmas week, they couldn't get enough stock. They flew off the shelves within hours. And that's something, again, that expanded. I mean, this is the picture that everybody's seen. I think there's only one photo, even though these were everywhere, there's only one photo that exists of a Toys R Us of this time, and this is it. And we use it all the time.
But we only have these primitive records of the old times. We can use this to reconstruct how these people lived and how they lived their lives.
There's more pictures of the 70s than there is of the noughties, it strikes me. But people never thought to take photos of things like this. But I remember this so well. The smell of all that plastic and the because that was three-dimensional, wasn't it? The cutouts and things like that, and the outers and the shelf wobblers. It was almost immersive. It was almost like going to an exhibition. It was almost an experience of its own, and it was always on the back wall there at the Toys R Us, where you saw it as soon as you walked in, because most of the branches were laid out very similarly, weren't they? And just seeing this again, it brings it all flooding back. And I wasn't even a kid, Luke.
No, I remember it. Like, I remember I was peak age coming into it when I come into it then, and I remember having the TARDIS playset. I remember, I don't know whether there was one which was in season 4 where you collect all the toys and you get a Vespa form. I think you get the Vespa form, and now it's worth so much money, and I have it, but I can't remember where it is. And I remember the other day just going back in Wales and just ripping out the files. Like, I'm finding this and I'm vlogging it. I was like, get a couple £100 off this. I was like, I'm having this, and I couldn't find it for the love. No, I found the Rachnos in the face of boat, but I couldn't find it. But no, yeah, it's mad. Yeah, but going back to Paul, I was like, yeah, I think this is the way now. I think Doctor Who can survive is through the cult audience viewership. Is like, if you look at the way now, ratings not really reported on streamers, but they report in minutes now. So it's like,
well, Netflix are signed up with Barb. That's why today Barb, I think it's last week's 7-day figures, isn't it? And Adolescence is number 1 for the 7-day figures for last week.
But it's like a cult show, like a Ted Lasso. Like they were like, oh, this season's been watched for 793 million minutes. It's like, cool, and Amazon do the same. And it's
but people actually 20 years ago, people were even saying this at the time. I don't know if you remember this, Dan, that people were saying, oh, well, it can never get audiences like it did because the audience is so fragmented. 20 years ago, people were saying people can watch whatever they want now on DVD, and most, it's been a hugely greater penetration of satellite and cable television to the UK by this point, and even just Freeview terrestrial digital channels. Even by then, the audience was much more fragmented than it had been by the last time Doctor Who had been on. So, but it's interesting how sort of in the 80s, 15 to 20 million was a good high figure for a TV show. 20 years ago, 9 or 10 million was a good high figure for a TV show. And we're talking about Adolescence being number 1 in last week's chart. I think it's about 6.7 million. So it's fighting for a decreasing share of a fragmenting market. And in 20 years' time, if something gets like 1 million in a week, it'll probably be, wow, it's amazing. It's broken the 1 million barrier.
I don't know.
You look at YouTubers as well. It's like YouTubers make so much money now, and YouTube is the biggest streaming platform in the world, like unequivocally. And we're streaming on YouTube right now. But it's like you look at like people like the Sidemen, for example, who post weekly content. They get instantly like 2 million a day, and the revenue they generate from that is astronomical. You compare that to like what the BBC are going to generate from 2 million. It's probably like a pittance compared to what they get through like ad revenue and viewership and watching sponsorships. So it wouldn't be surprised if we go fully, like TV dies completely, we go fully into the viewership model and YouTube starts kind of taking over in that sense. You get Netflix does ads, Amazon does ads. It's essentially we're going back to cable. That's what we're going. We're going back to cable. So it's a really weird time to be a viewer.
Yeah,
so I went so far right then. Jesus.
No, I see the distinction that you're making. It is things are changing all the time, and as you say, I think it's taking an unreasonable amount of time for some institutions, if you like, be they publishers or broadcasters, to kind of accept the fact that times are changing and incorporate this into that model, or look at alternative methods of various of the ways that things are funded, distributed, and reported. I don't know if that's a particularly British thing, but it is a thing, and I think it's almost as if they're riding a dragon in some respects. They feel they can't anticipate in which direction it's going to go next, because technology evolves so quickly too. I mean, look at this is something we talk about all the time on this show, because we're never not surprised by whatever's going on with AI in particular. It seems to be one amazing development after another, and they're coming so thick and fast. And so I think within the industry that's the same too. And even though that they do try and style it out, that the people who are often asked to give quotes on this sort of thing, they're only human, and it does show.
Yeah.
Last week,
it's William Goldman's famous quote, isn't it, from the book he wrote, Adventures in the Screen Trade, where he wrote that famous quote about the film industry. How do you know it's going to be a film's going to be a success? Nobody knows anything. It's like that, I think, with the media industry generally at the moment, and how it's going to develop in the future, because, as you say, it all develops and changes so quickly. If we came back in 20 years' time and see how things developed over another 20 years, it would have changed and developed in ways that we can't even begin to imagine right now, I think.
People sort of
we're very philosophical this evening, aren't we?
Feeling their way. We're all feeling our way, I think. So everything was okay, of course, and Doctor Who was back to stay. A succession of actors followed Christopher Eccleston. David Tennant became probably the biggest actor on TV for a time. Matt Smith, an internationally renowned character actor, and that's just the beginning, those initial few years of the show. There's always so much to talk about whenever we reach back to this time. The Radio Times I think they held up their share of the bargain here, celebrating Doctor Who this week with these 6 covers here, marking NuWho at 20. They seem to be selling quite well. But something that they put in their article, 6 or 7 page article, which I thought sort of chimes with what you were just saying there, Paul, is how they got a quote here from the BBC, and the BBC said that there were over 70 million hours of Doctor Who watched in 2024, including the various spin-offs and iterations. So that's all of Doctor Who, and yeah, so it's not just the new series, but in many respects, I'm sure classic Doctor Who, if there was no new Doctor Who, I'm sure that classic Doctor Who would be on iPlayer by now. But would the Whoniverse kind of hub exist had there not been that successful second iteration there? So 70 million hours worth of Doctor Who watched in 2024, including spin-offs and the various productions. And it says, amazingly, since its return, not only did Doctor Who get that second series that Russell T Davies wasn't sure that it would. They ordered the second and third at the same time, didn't they? I seem to remember. But it's managed to air at least one episode every single year since. And that's, there's been those gap years that have driven us mad, but that's something. I think it's not insubstantial that it's managed that.
It sounds like, I don't know, it sounds slightly kind of, we've managed to do at least one episode every year. I know, I'm being unfair, I know, but I'm not sure I'd have quite written that in that way if I were doing it.
Yeah, you could be right. Yes. So speaking of writing, Paul Hayes, you are the author of these two. Doctor Who books, The Long Game and Pull to Open from 10 Acre Films. And I'll be honest, I haven't got any of these. Every time I've tried to go and get them, this is how popular they are. They've been reprinted a couple of times. They sell out pretty quickly, don't they? Are they currently available?
They should be, I think. Yeah, it's because like a lot of small publishers, 10 Acre don't have the facility to keep a lot of stock, on hand. So they just, when they sell out of a run, they'll then print another, 100 or something. So it's just because there isn't a huge stockpile in a warehouse somewhere. So but no, Stuart normally does get them going again pretty quickly after the last consignment is sold out.
I like to get the 10 Acre Films people on, and we could bring them to task about all of that.
Stuart did a lot of the stuff like I think he did some of the the film posters that they did for like the early Capaldi episodes and that.
Oh, I know who you mean now. Yeah, Stuart Manning.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, I had no idea that it was him. Well, it makes more sense now because they're always so beautifully designed to everything that comes out of 10 Acre Films, is whether it be on film or in print. So yeah, head over to 10 Acre Films, to the website there, and see if they're still available. You might get lucky. I've got one more question for you
as well. There is also Pull to Open went legit. There's an official BBC version because the rights were purchased by BBC Audiobooks, and I did an abridgment for them, and that is available. You can find that right now on Amazon or Audible or wherever you get your audiobooks. And
you've got Chris Naylor narrating that as well.
Yeah, Gary Sullivan for Big Finish. Yeah, he narrates it. Yeah.
Fabulous stuff. I've got one further question for you, though, Paul. Now, given the fact, so looking at these two titles, now, I mean, even though we're talking about 20 years of new Doctor Who, the truth of the matter is, as spoken by Bad Wolf themselves, there is now a third iteration of Doctor Who, the classic Doctor Who, new Doctor Who, and what we're witnessing now, led by Ncuti Gatwa, is all new Doctor Who, technically an entire new production. Could there be a further story there that you could be looking to tell at some point in the future? You know, the story of how all new Doctor Who and the whole global streaming platform model partnership came to be. I mean, does that interest you in any way? Because already where this is being reported and spoken about, it's only happened in the last 3 or 4 years. So many accounts are varying about it. I think we need you, Paul. We need you to distill it all, to make it all clear, and to tell this story. Are we winning you over? You're tempted at all?
It'll be a great story. The story of Doctor Who finally, after all those years, it's fascinating, isn't it? How when it finished at the end of the 80s, it seemed as if the only future for Doctor Who at that point would be if it became an independent production made for the BBC rather than by them. And it took 35 years for that to finally end up happening, because when they did bring it back in 2003, they kept it in-house. So that'll be a fascinating story about how that happened, and it'll be a great book for someone. I don't think I'm necessarily the right person to write it. I am working on another book at the moment, which is sort of the draft of it finished, that is a kind of it's going the other way, really. It's sort of pre-Doctor Who. The idea is to tell the story of the Doctor Who slot before Doctor Who was in it. So that's what the next one's hopefully going to be for me. But yeah, no, it'll be a great book for someone someday.
Oh, it's a great read. John Carley, who plays the War Doctor, he recommended it to me on one drunken night when we were watching Escape Rooms on the collection Blu-rays, and he was like, "Oh, you need to read this. You need to read this." So I bought it, and I kind of left it for a little while, and I was on a train ride, and 2.5 hour train ride. I was like, "I'll go on, I'll start it, and I'll give it a read," and then at the end I was like, just stay on the train for another 2.5 hours and finish it. I was like, Jesus Christ. I was like, this is mind-boggling on what's going on. So no, it's absolutely fantastic read. And
basically what it was with The Long Game is that all those kind of stories all sort of existed separately. There were all sorts of articles and interviews and documentaries that told sort of all different bits and different strands of that story from 96 to 03. But maybe arrogantly, I don't know, I didn't think there was kind of one thing that kind of brought them all together and had all the separate strands in one place. So I just wanted to kind of tell all those different elements, like, you know, you have the website element, the attempts to make a film, all the different attempts to kind of relaunch it with the BBC, and also provide some of that background and context of what was going on, because it was a huge time of change. It always seems to be a huge time of change for the BBC, but it was a huge kind of era of change, because you're going through that era. The mid-90s, you're kind of at the end of that era of the BBC being a kind of enormous production house, and things are splintering much more into independent and more regional production and so forth, and things being, you know, they have the big split between BBC production, BBC broadcast. Things are commissioned in a different way, and the whole kind of British television industry is changing through that period. And there's the whole kind of interesting kind of terror of anything sci-fi or fantasy during that period as well, and there being a real kind of aversion to commissioning anything like that. And Joe Ahern said to me when I interviewed him for the book that, if you wanted something that was kind of fancy, you had to kind of smuggle it in. You had to say, oh, it's a psychological thriller, but it happens to have vampires in it. Don't tell anyone. And so you always had to kind of, get it in through the back door.
Yeah, I noticed as somebody who was keen to get any kind of geeky content whatsoever, if there was any kind of inkling of that anywhere, I'd immediately notice it and latch on harder. There was a sitcom that Carl Howman made in the mid-90s called Mulberry, which on the surface, I don't know if you remember the show.
I haven't watched it since I was a kid, but I remember really liking it at the time.
Well, on the surface, it was just a show about a handyman who got a job working for an old lady. And then
but
you
have
have
to... kind of implication that he was some sort of maybe even like an angel type figure.
Yeah, it was a supernatural kind of. It was a piece of geeky sci-fi, really.
Actually, even there's a very early episode of Holby City where there's a character who may or may not be an angel. So they did do these weird things from time to time, but yeah, you never really got a big unapologetic. The closest that you got stuff like it started to happen, obviously in the early 2000s, it then starts to happen again. You get things like. I know Spooks isn't a sci-fi show, but it was very much a kind of action adventure, high concept kind of type show, and you just started to get a kind of bigger range of dramas. And this is something again Davis talked about very early on, and in the first kind of big interview he did with DWM after the recommission. I remember him saying about how the BBC has things like Strange and Spooks and Holby City and Judge John Deed and all these kind of different genres. Yeah. So he said, it was inevitable they'd add sci-fi into that eventually. So why not use the best sci-fi property of all that you've got sitting there?
Do you remember this? It's called Crime
Traveller. Yes,
Of course I do. I've got that too.
The cheeky little knob, which I found really annoying at the time. The little knob. I felt like I was almost being kind of, teased that they weren't making Doctor Who, but they put that little bit in with the police box. When he says he's saying, "Oh, I'm going to pursue," because he's at this place where they've got like antique phone boxes, and they send this police colleague system. Oh, what are you going to do next, Jeff? And he says, "I'm going to pursue another line of inquiry." And he looks at the police box over the guy's shoulder.
Jonathan Creek, Strange with the Welsh actor from
Coupling. Richard Cole, is it?
Richard Coyle, that's it. Fabulous actor. Sorry, yeah. But for years, he was my fantasy casting for the Doctor based on that.
Baker's in, I think, the last one as a blind priest.
Yes. My God.
And Joe Ahern directed that as well. And it was written by Andrew Marshall, who used to be obviously David Renwick's writing partner.
2.4 Children.
Yeah. And he claimed to me, when I spoke to him for The Long Game, Andrew Marshall claimed that one of the reasons there was not a second series of Strange was because Lorraine Heggessey redirected that money to Doctor Who, but that wasn't something Heggessey remembered, and Mal Young remembered the money that Heggessey redirected actually coming from an entertainment budget. So I don't know if that was just something Marshall was told when they just didn't want to do a second series of Strange, but certainly he had the impression that Lorraine Heggessey had not commissioned a second series of Strange because she wanted to recommission Doctor Who.
Plausible deniability. Maybe. God, there's so many stories. There's so many sort of avenues of investigation you can go down in talking about this. Type 40 Live's coverage of the 20th anniversary of NuWho continues on the next edition in just a couple of days' time. Until then, yes, share more of your memories in the comments. We're all ears. Yeah. Sorry, Chris.
So you went into a phone box with a mobile phone. They phoned it was raining. It was pouring the rain, that's why. So I went there to get. So you went into a phone box and you had a mobile.
To cry in private.
I was hoping it was a TARDIS.
Yes, we did. We're back in the present day there to sign off on this edition of Type 40 Live. Thank you for your company, Paul Hayes, author of Pull to Open and The Long Game for 10 Acre Films and Books.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been very enjoyable just to sit and chat about Doctor Who.
it's never a chore. I'd like to think, but So if people want to get those books, they may still be in print for the time being. But the deal is,
they usually, even if you see them out of print, if you check back a couple of days later or something, Stuart would have put another order in. But the audiobook version of Pull to Open should always be available from your audiobook store of choice.
Fabulous stuff. Wonderful. Yes, and you can reach out to us as well through our social media, Instagram and X, at Type 40 Doctor Who there. As always, you can join us in the Type 40 Facebook group too. Come and reminisce there as well. Post your favourite images or videos or some fan art if you like. Anything that celebrates your love, maybe your childhood, your connection to new Doctor Who in these last 20 years of what was, the biggest comeback in British TV history. You can do all that in the Facebook group. The Speak Pipe too, new for 2025 across the podcasts and the video content. You can be part of Type 40 and Type 40 Live, all from the palm of your hand. Oh, it doesn't get any better, does it? Yes, so you can record us a message, a question, a prediction, any feedback whatsoever. Start a fight if you like. Pick us up on something you don't like, or by all means, tell us what we're doing right. Now and again, it's always nice to hear. Yes, you can do that through SpeakPipe. There's the Facebook group, Instagram and X at Type 40 Doctor Who. What a joy to have your company here on this edition of the show, Paul. Thank you so much. We've been on Rumble, X, YouTube, and Facebook as always, taking comments. 20 years. 20 years. It's good that you've got another book coming, Paul. Maybe if we keep on it, you might be tempted to do until then, we'll. I'll have to get these. And leave Luke
really good,
to
really good
to finish it off there. Thank you everybody for the comments. Let's look and see what else we've got before we head off. FAQs, says Del Lynn. FAQs. What does that mean? Frequently asked questions. Frequently asked questions. I wrote a Doctor Who book about 30 years ago, but I don't know how to publish it, says Mosh. Get a publisher. Self-publish.
But you've not told us. It's actual fiction. What's the...
Let's know a little bit more. I can't read that out, Adrian. Come on. Member berries, says Lee Smith. I don't know what.
The chat's just gone completely wrong.
Oh, isn't member berries? Isn't that something? It's like meant to be low hanging fruit, something that only pleases fans or something. Isn't that? Doesn't it mean that?
Something like that. Yeah. Matthew V says the next Doctor is Rachel Ziegler, and thank you very much. We've got more people talking about Richard Coyle and Ian Richardson.
Oh yes, in Strange. Yeah.
We've kicked some dust off some more latent memories of other shows, pretenders to the Doctor Who crown. Happily though, Doctor Who did return and brush them all aside. New episodes from April the 12th coming, of course, to iPlayer and to Disney Plus. There will be all over that here in our TARDIS on Type 40 Live. Join us again next time for more free speaking, big thinking news, views, nostalgia, discussion, and banter as ever. Mondays and Thursdays from 8 p.m. here at Type 40 Live. 20 years of new Doctor Who. So many memories for me, even though I was an adult when it all started. But that partnership and these two characters, Paul, I know it sounds like a cliche, but it really did make me feel like a 12-year-old kid again. And to me, that's what Doctor Who, that's what I want Doctor Who to do, even if it can only deliver that in 45, 50-minute chunks. If it does that, if I feel a fraction of that, then I know it's working.
It was a special time, and I always, my personal theory about Doctor Who is that you can dress it up with or strip it down however you want. You can strip it right down to the basics. You can dress it up with any kind of subtext or allegory or commentary you want to put in it. But at the end of the day, if people are enjoying the story, they're not going to complain about whatever you've put in it or whatever you've stripped it down to. If it's a story that they'll like, that they're enjoying, they'll be carried along with it and they'll enjoy it. And that's just it, I think.
Thank you again for your company, Paul. We do hope to tempt you back at some point because you do like to talk, don't you? We like people.
Okay.
There's always
you do like to talk, don't you? Do come again, won't you?
There's always plenty to talk about. That we love the enthusiasm though, because it's sometimes people can clam up you know, or they can, you know, but you definitely you're not a clown.
Well, I have been in radio for years, darling. You know.
There you go. That'll be it.
The first time I was doing this, I was getting drunk. So just
you were steaming, weren't you? Yeah,
probably. Well, we watched Joy to the World, weren't we? So,
oh yeah, we were. Yes, so I think this is our cue to move on. But yeah, Luke, as always, thank you for your company. Yeah, it's getting all cozy. There's you with your fur on. The cats have got theirs on too. We're going to have a sort of. We're going to try and feed the cats. See if we can tempt them out there between now and the next show. Thank you, everybody, for all your comments and all your memories about the great comeback of Doctor Who and all the 20 years in between, the slings and the arrows, the peaks and the valleys. Keep them coming as well in the comments section. We always have the time. If you have the space here at Type 40 Live, we'll see you on the next one, though. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.